Okay, well, welcome to Next Gen 9. It's great to have another Next Gen year, and it's good to be here. Thank you all for turning out, and as usual with Next Gen, it's a free event, so all day we kind of provide the balance point for everything else that's going on. So as you have a 202 or something else, people come and go. For the better speakers, people stay, and for the other ones, people leave. So I encourage you to, regardless of what you have during the day, to come back in and to be involved. The way we're going to run today's event is it's heavily focused on presentations this morning, and then we're going to transition into open source, which, if you're not familiar with that, is it's going to be a form of working groups and action sessions. So the way that we'll do this is we'll start off with content and topics, and we'll go into action and work, and we'll really try to combine the two so that we both are excited and provoked by the ideas that our speakers will be sharing with us, and then we will do something with them. We will try to advance those ideas, challenge those ideas, engage those ideas, work with the speakers, work with people who are in the audience now, who have experience with that, people who are bringing fresh ideas to those ideas. And it should be a very exciting afternoon. So encourage you to be a part of that. And also, I should say, we're not going to have many questions and answers sessions during the morning's part. And so we will try to focus all of your questions into both the breaks and the lunch, and then also as it comes back around into the afternoon session. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what's become the theme of this year's Next Gen Day, which is what's next. The question of next really is one that is important for Next Gen because it's how we've called ourselves. It's our name. And one of the things that's been very clear is that Next Gen is not just an event and not just a group for young people. Officially, we're the next generation of new urbanists, but generation is said there as a bigger picture, as trying to encapsulate the next generation of ideas. But one of the things that I hope will come out today, especially in the afternoon session, is what is Next Gen? How are we most useful? How do we best serve the overall CNU, and how do we best accomplish the mission that we have? The other reason why next is an important question is because this year the theme for the overall CNU is the new world. And as we look at what's become a radically different world than the world in which the CNU was founded, with an economy that's quite different, to say the least, the question of what that new world is an important one for us to grapple with and to think about. And a big part of the way that has generated conversation among Next Gen, and this is why the picture here is an important one, is because we've started to turn back to the cities. It's a mistake to say that the new urbanism has ever not thought about the cities, but as we go along, we're finding that more and more these cities become the new frontier, and there'll be a handful of people talking today about places like this, where there's an existing urban infrastructure. There's a lot of investment, but we haven't taken care of it. So rather than building outwards, we need to turn back inwards. So to that point, I'm going to offer this quote, something that Andres Duany wrote in Metropolis, where he said, "The important work is close to home, humble, and urgent." And I think this is one of the things that we have to face up to as we look at what's next. There is important work to be done, but it's not going to have some of the glamour that some of the work in the past has had. It's not necessarily going to be somewhere far away. It's often going to be right at our doorsteps, and it's going to need us to be right at the doorstep. We're going to have to pay attention to what's close to us, and we're going to have to be willing to do the hard work. But it's urgent. There's no question about that. There's the work that needs to be done is if we don't do it, then someone else will do it, and they may not do it as well as we have the ability to do it. One of the reasons we're in this problem is we've kind of missed the point for a while. We, you know, I don't need to talk too much about the economic downturn, but this is one of the big problems that's behind a lot of that. There's a big difference between what we built and what we need, and so now we need to correct and build what we need. And the data supports that quite clearly. Some of this is from Chuck Marone's Strong Towns organization. Chuck will be speaking shortly. He's done a very good job, as well as others, showing the downward trend of our fortunes, and they're going to keep going down unless we change some things very radically. Some of this is also from my own local municipality, where, like up on the upper right, there's a big red arrow headed down. That's our budget gap. So this work is urgent, and it's all around. So it's going to be close to home. So as we go through the day, I challenge you to think about this, to confront it, to think about what it means for you and your work, what it means for where you are, the place that's yours, and how together we are going to accomplish this and figure out what's next. With that, I want to welcome Mike Lydon, and let me see if I can find your presentation.
It's right on the desktop.
Okay, I'll let you introduce yourself. Set it up.
Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Good? Yay, all right, next gen. I'm going to, hold on, just scroll through here at the top of my presentation. Who here is at their first CNU? Let's see who's in the room. Wow, that's awesome, a lot of people. Okay. I certainly see a lot of familiar faces, but definitely a lot of new ones as well. Okay, so how about first next gens, actually? People been to CNU before and this is their first next gen? Does that overlap? Okay, a few people. Nice. Will. Looks good on my screen. Change that mode. All right, so moving forward, you see them speaking about tactical urbanism today. Who's heard of that word or that phrase? Okay, quite a few people in the room. Well, Will asked me today not really to so much speak about examples and the whole sort of normal presentation track that I take with that. I'm going to talk a lot more about, briefly too, about how this sort of initiative has built over the last year. This really is 1 year old. I spoke about tactical urbanism on a panel at CNU last year, and the thing was maybe just 6 weeks old. So there's been a lot that's happened in the last year, and learning, about this topic, sharing it, and learning from many of you in this room on how to push this forward. So today we're really talking about this initiative and how it can grow and how everyone can sort of contribute. So street plans, this is our little consulting company. I'm a principal along with Tony Garcia, who's, raise your hand, Tony. There's Tony. We're based out of Miami and New York. We do lots of different types of projects. We're consultants, so we're kind of working all over. But today, again, with tactical urbanism, this is really more like a research and advocacy initiative out of our firm, and alongside a lot of people within NextGen. So I'm going to be speaking mostly about that. This idea, right? Why are a lot of us in this room? We're planners, we're architects, we're designers, we're developers. We're really concerned or interested in making a brighter future. We don't want the future to suck. And so we do these things very, very well in terms of making plans. But plans oftentimes are meaningless. They're good ideas a lot of times, but they don't get implemented unless there's real action, unless there's an urgency for action. This is a great example. This is Midtown Manhattan from 1969, a plan done by RPA, Regional Planning Association. And what you can't see, if I have a laser pointer here. Okay. The spine of Broadway in 1969, they're proposing to pedestrianize most of this. And if you go to New York today, that's actually happened. But that was a good idea out of this plan that took 40 years to implement. And really what it took was long chairs and barrels. After 40 years, Jeanette Siddiq-Khan, who's the director of transportation, said, enough, this is a good idea, let's test it. Let's try it, let's see if it works. This has been on the books for so long. And lo and behold, you start with a couple $1,000s worth of furniture you can buy at Rite Aid, and you throw it in the middle of the street, and it really changed the paradigm, not only in New York City, but I think nationally. So at this time, I was just moving to New York City from Miami. And one of the reasons why I was moving to the city was to see this stuff in action, because there's so much of this happening all over the city, and I thought it was really, really inspiring. And so I started to look into some of these ideas, how this sort of very first step approach seemed very tactical, it was like very cheap, but the initiative, the thought stream was always to go to the long term, to the permanent. We're going to start with this, we're going to check it out, we're going to take data, see how it's working. If it fails, no big deal, it's a couple $1,000s worth of chairs. So taking that idea, that thought kernel, to this NextGen retreat that we had 2 years ago in New Orleans. These are a bunch of colleagues that you'll either meet or have already met who are in the room. And we were really just jamming on a whole bunch of ideas that weekend. And one of the ideas I brought to the table was, well, there's this sort of trend growing, between Build a Better Block, what's happening in New York, the guerrilla gardening movement really picking up steam, even though it started in the 70s, picking up steam again. And to me, that seemed to be a lot of overlap. So that whole weekend was basically discussing, for me personally, discussing those ideas, trying to figure out what the umbrella is, what do we call it. And a couple people said, why don't you just write it up? We're going to leave this weekend with to-do lists. And that was my to-do list, was to put together a little bit of information about it. So I put together Tactical Urbanism Volume 1, put it online when I was traveling on vacation. And when I came back from vacation, it had probably, just hundreds and hundreds of more, eyes on it than I ever thought. I was trying to share it with my friends, and it kind of grew from there. So within just a couple weeks, people started writing about it and contacting me and blogging about it. It's like, wow, this really hit a nerve. And to me, that signified, well, I better get out in front of this curve, because this is what's coming, or this is happening. I need to stay on top of it. So I just kind of kept researching the topic. And in general, if you've not heard of tactical urbanism, it's really about the short-term things that lead to long-term change, short-term action. This is a great quote from Nabil Hamdi, who wrote a book that's actually available for free online called About the Art of Practice and the Limits of Planning in Cities. Really thinking about new ways of working that are not necessarily always top-down. If they are top-down, they're not trying to come with a solution from the very beginning. You're kind of arriving at testing an idea and learning from that as it moves forward. So Volume 2 came out in April, beginning of April, March of this year. So it's just over 2 months out there in the wild. But we doubled the number of tactics in terms of our case studies. We started looking at a lot more of the trends. Why is this gaining so much attention? Why are people interested in this topic? Very intentionally kept the book for free online. There's no better way to disseminate ideas than having it to be for free. So it's been a really good way for us as a firm to share our ideas without having the barrier of charging money. Now, we think that's an important step, and it's important to use the internet in that way. So I'm not going to go too much into examples, but we say this in the volume 2. There's really the 5 key characteristics of having the vision, thinking really, really carefully about context, having the agility to be able to make the changes on the fly as you learn. In that way, you create a lot of value. And then finally, and I think most importantly, a lot of these projects that we document and been studying are really about building social capital within your community. And when you work on projects together in the street with your city planning department, et cetera, you build relationships and connections that you might not otherwise. And I think that's probably the most important thing moving forward. So what we found is that really, why is this gaining popularity? These 3 things, which Will's kind of touched upon briefly, have kind of crashed together in the last 3 years. The recession, shifting demographics, people moving back to cities, young and old, and of course the internet, which has totally changed the way planners communicate ideas. And if you think about it, when I started my career in 2005, people were not using YouTube and blogs and creating interactive tools for planning and idea generation at all. That was nowhere to be found yet. So I think that's really interesting how we're just now really starting to take hold of these tools and utilize them. And then also I'd like to speak specifically about the age group of Gen Y. Not that Gen Y is pushing this idea only. In fact, these ideas go way, way, way back and through many generations of how to work. But now, again, there's this urgency. There's this sense of, I'm not going to wait for my city to fix that crosswalk. I'm going to paint it myself. I was listening to a generational expert speaker. Those exist. And at the Bike Summit in D.C. And this guy was talking about Gen Y, and I didn't really find his speech to be completely on point and accurate about everything. You can't really speak for a generation. But he had a couple good nuggets, and one of those was that Gen Y is really outcome-oriented. We want to just do the damn thing and then worry about the process later, kind of backfill, work in reverse. And when he mentioned that to me, I was like, yeah, that makes total sense. We're kind of impatient. Some of us were raised that way. And I think largely that's why you see a lot of people going out there themselves and making change and kind of worrying about the formal process later. So again, our method now is kind of to build on that. It's open, it's collaborative. We take ideas from people. If you've got a tactic that you're using, email us. We'll get into the volume 3. But we're also bringing people together for formal events, discussing, challenging each other, debating. We just had one in Philadelphia at the end of last month. Jen Krause was there and a few others, I think, who were here. It was really, really exciting because we had about 75 people crammed into a little storefront just north of Center City in Philadelphia. And we were able to generate ideas and work with each other and understand what was going on the ground in Philadelphia and make that connection to what's happening in other cities. We had a few people there from Chile who are really fascinated in the topic and are going to take some of these ideas and bring them back to Santiago. And so there you see just a few images of that. Again, these events are free. We think that's pretty important. And this initiative has had impact, much to our surprise from the very beginning. But it's quite exciting to see the number of people who are accessing the documents. So in just a year, we've had 26,000 people check out the first volume. In the last 2 months, we've had almost that. So the word is getting out there. Planetizen named it a top trend for 2011, 2012. And then this is a map showing where it's been downloaded around the world. And I don't say all that to toot our own horn. I say that because I think the method that we're using by putting it online, having it be free, taking submissions, having it be pretty open in the process is really important. But as I've mentioned, this is not necessarily new, a new way of working. We're just kind of updating it for what's happening now. And so this project from 1970 is an artist in San Francisco, put a park on it. That's what she did. There's farm animals there. She was basically raising awareness about public space and the lack thereof in the city. And she picked a very, difficult scenario right under a freeway, an on-ramp. But she did 4 different installations like that. And if you think about Build a Better Block or some of these other tactics we've been utilizing, it's very similar to that. And there's ideas like this that go way back, like play streets in New York City, shutting down blocks, for a day at a time, a week at a time, summer long. That goes back to 1912 with the New York City Police Department. And I even show sometimes examples of the people who sell books along the river in the Seine who've been there for 500 years, and it took about 450 of those to be made legitimate. Where we're seeing this happen, in places that people love, places that are worth caring about. They have the physicality, the bones, they're walkable. They may be completely underutilized at the moment, but they have this real potential moving forward to be loved again. We're not seeing a lot of these tactics or these initiatives being taken up in highly suburban or exurban places, along the arterials like are behind us. That's a very, very different kind of challenge. In a place that's lovable, it tends to be smaller in scale. And so when you take action, it actually is noticeable and has an impact. And so moving forward, thinking about these tools and these ideas, these are three, I think, very powerful things that might actually be converging or could come together to create a whole new platform for very localized, small-scale, urgent but humble projects. The top one, who's heard of Neighborland? Raise your hand. Okay, just very few people. Neighborland is an initiative that started in New Orleans. It's now being used nationwide, I believe. And it's basically about generating ideas. Go to this website, check out what's going on in your neighborhood, who wants to fix what, who wants to work on what project, and being able to have conversations around those ideas, connect with people online. Now, IOBI, who's heard of IOBI? Even less people. Cool. IOBI is an acronym. It stands for In Our Backyard. So as opposed to NIMBY, this is IOBI. And it's a funding platform to be utilized with small-scale local neighborhood projects. And it was beta tested in New York City. It just launched 2 weeks ago nationwide. So if you can use this in your neighborhood to generate funds. It's kind of like Kickstarter, but has a very different specific bent to it in terms of the environment and specifically the built environment and making changes. And so you think about idea generation, seeing what the big ideas are locally, think about funding it locally with your neighbors, your friends, your business owners, and then implementing it with action. I think those three things could really be powerful, as I said. But to move forward to this idea of tactical urbanism, and there's a lot of these techniques like parklets, pavement to plazas. They're gaining traction in a lot of different cities in a lot of exciting contexts, and we think that's amazing. That's great. But also there's a risk of not really adapting these ideas fully to the neighborhood, to the context, just dropping them in again. We'd be repeating the same mistakes that we've done in the past. And so this idea of patterns and pattern states to pattern cities, Jane Jacobs quotes a historian in this book where she talks about pattern states. And in thinking about that, pattern states have influence historically, coming up with the ways of, working politically. That's probably, I think, in my opinion, changed somewhat in the last, half decade, and especially the last 20 years. I think cities are where most ideas are generated and have the biggest influence today. Less so states, more so cities. So you think about that, how ideas go from one place to the next, and you apply it to this quote where she's really warning people, just because it's new, don't adopt it just because it's new. You really think about adapting it. And so with that, I'm just going to end with this really hopeful slide from Gardner, Maine. I don't know if Kara is in the room. Is Kara Wilbur here? No. This is from her Main Street, a town that I actually grew up in until I was 8. She photographed this and shared it, which I thought was really, really great. Putting this in the storefront, who wants to work together, who wants to make a difference? So with that, I will leave it. And you can follow us on Twitter. So. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Next up, we have Chuck Marone. Chuck, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Will. I had a Twitter interaction with someone named Sarah today, who I know is in this room, because I just saw that she had this. Where's she at? There you are. Welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. I wanted to repeat the question that you had and repeat my answer, because the question that she posed on Twitter today is, this is my first Congress, does anybody have any advice? And my advice to you was to stick your nose into any conversation that looks interesting. And when Mike asked, is there anybody here that's new? There were a lot of people that raised their hand. I did my first Congress back in Denver, which means that in terms of some of these people, I'm a relative newbie. My first Congress in Denver, I was not sure that I wanted to be indoctrinated into this stuff. I was kind of resistant to the infection. And I would go from my hotel room to whatever Andres was talking, back to my hotel room, and I resisted coming to Next Gen. I resisted all this. And I found, these people kind of reaching out and sucking me in. And as I allowed myself to do that, look at what happens, 4 years later. I wind up with all of these great, compadres working on some fantastic projects. Stick your nose into other people's business here. That's what this place is about. I'm going to talk about another initiative that we've been working on at Strong Towns that we brought to NextGen and had kind of an enthusiastic reception, and are now ready to kind of take it to the next level and really need to interact with you and present this as an opportunity for you to kind of help us as well. Just briefly, my name is Chuck Marone. I'm the Executive Director of Strong Towns. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to support a model of growth that allows America's towns to become financially strong and resilient. We do the Strong Towns blog, the Strong Towns podcast. You can find us online at strongtowns.org. I've been going around the country doing a presentation that we call the Curbside Chat. 2 years ago, I started doing this in my home state and in the neighboring states. I'm from Minnesota. And literally, I would drive, 2-3 hours and speak to a group of 3 people or 4 people. I drove all the way to Bismarck, North Dakota once, which was just 6.5 hours away, and wound up speaking to a group of 3 people in like a huge auditorium. 3 people showed up. I was in California 2 weeks ago. We had audiences in the hundreds. Last week I was in Memphis, or 2 weeks ago I was in Memphis. We had a couple hundred people there. Last week in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, we had a couple hundred people there. The gist of the conversation is essentially based around these 3 principles. The current path that cities are on is not financially stable. The future is not going to resemble the recent past. And the main determinant of future prosperities will be the ability of local leaders to transform their communities. The audiences that we're speaking to are enthusiastic. They're growing. But they all come, the message that we're delivering to them is kind of premised on this idea that is very difficult for them to get their minds around, even though it's quite simple, and that is that we need to first stop doing what we're doing. We need to stop building highways. We need to stop building overpasses. We need to stop putting billions of dollars into extra lanes and extra capacity. We need to stop the kind of forward inertia of the system. We need to stop building this type of thing. This is what we call a STROD. This is a street road hybrid. This is we like to say it's the futon of transportation options. It doesn't do anything very well. It tries to do a whole lot of things, but it doesn't do anything very well. It is not a platform for capturing value. It's not a platform for moving vehicles quickly. But this is the default setting that we've kind of moved to across the country in terms of our transportation systems. And when we're telling people that they need to stop, we're a long ways gone when we have systems that by default look like this. And it's occurred to me that what we're really dealing with here is Newton's first law. An object in motion tends to remain in motion unless acted on by an external force. There's so much inertia in our system today to keep building those STRODs. When you have a project that's going through the works, it's probably been in process for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, maybe even longer. There's been engineers out buying up right-of-way for half a decade. There have been developers out speculating on that property for a long, long time. There's all of this kind of forward momentum to keep doing what we're doing. And we really, if we're going to do something differently, need to, first of all, just stop where we're at. And so we need an external force to kind of bring this to a stop. And I want us to be part of that external force. I think the economy today, I think the reality that we are going broke and that our development pattern is actually causing that bankruptcy, the fact that the DOTs across the country have 25, 35, 45 cents on the dollar of what they need to maintain all the systems we've built, these are powerful things that are bringing this all to an end. We can be kind of that that pinch point that helps push it over the edge if we can develop the right narrative. So when we got together in Miami Beach a couple months ago, I kind of threw out this idea that we wanted to put together this report talking about kind of the misconceptions of mobility, the things that we as a society, in a broad sense, generally agree Not because they're right, but because they've been the consensus for such a long period of time. And in our group, we kind of did a breakout group, and we brainstormed what these misunderstandings were, and we came up with three. The first one is that highway design knowledge is applicable to local streets. This is the idea that the body of wisdom that we've collected through really experimentation and trial and error in the highway system, and now is embodied in things like the Ashto's Green Book, is somehow applicable to our local streets and our local neighborhoods. It is the default setting across the country, and we want to break down this misunderstanding. We want to show how a stroad like this, where's Will? Will showed me this stroad in Chico, California. How, you know, a design like this, which is designed by engineers for safety reasons, for traffic reasons, to handle a certain volume of ADT, all of that, is far inferior in many, many ways to a road, a nice local street that actually handles a higher volume of traffic, literally like 4 blocks away. This is a well-designed place. This is a place that can not only handle the traffic, but you know, can provide a platform where you can actually have some life to it. You will not find this in the Ashto Green Book. And what we need to do is we need to help public officials understand that, those highway design principles do not apply at the local level. The second misunderstanding that we identified is that increasing local automobility creates positive economic development. There's this belief, kind of inherent, that we need to build this stuff in order to create jobs, in order to create economic development, in order to foster business opportunities. We build the new overpass, and we get the new Target, the new Quickie Mart, the new McDonald's. For some reason, we don't, you know, turn around and look 4 miles up the road where the Target and the Quickie Mart and the McDonald's are closing and relocating here. We look at it as a net overall economic development. What we need to have public officials understand is that, no, this dogma needs to go away. This is not economic development. It is an exchange of near-term cash value for this long-term liability. It is the illusion of wealth. The third misunderstanding, then, that we identified that we need to attack is this idea that public safety is enhanced by widening travel lanes and prioritizing auto access. Many of us have been to the meetings where, you know, we get maybe through the design review process, we get maybe through, you know, even the engineering department, and we come up with a good design and we put it down in front of the public and the elected officials, and who stands up? The fire chief, the police chief. They say, wait a sec, there's no way we can do this. This is not going to work for all kinds of public safety reasons. Well, we know that building streets like this is dangerous. We know that more people are killed in auto accidents, more children are killed in auto accidents than anything else that is going to happen in this country, you know, once they're through those early months of child raising. We know these things, and we can show how these designs are not only dangerous, but very, very expensive and counterproductive. So where we're at today in this process is that we really need volunteers. This is not an initiative that we can do at Strong Towns on our own. This is not an initiative that we at Next Gen can do on our own. And so in the afternoon here, I'm going to be holding, as part of the open source session, a group to talk about this specific project. We need people to do research. You know, one of the things we brainstormed and came up with is that a lot of this inertia is embodied in our state statutes. For example, in Minnesota, my home state, you're required that every transportation corridor that you build have a minimum design speed of 30 miles an hour. It doesn't matter if it's a neighborhood street, if it has 3 homes on it, if it's out in front of a school, the minimum design speed is 30 miles an hour. And to get a waiver on that is this huge process through the DOT. What we want to do is research state statutes, we want to research bodies of literature and come up with things like this. We need people to help us prepare case studies. There's a whole body of knowledge out there in terms of benefit cost analysis, the impact of these Strode designs. Every community has numerous examples. When we release this report, The report itself is going to be detailed and specific, but we want to provide all of those heartstring stories, those stories that people can read and latch onto and identify their own community in them. And we really want to do a huge PR effort to kind of roll these out over time. So we're looking for people that are interested in taking a project or two in their community, putting it in a format and including it as a case study. We need people to help prepare graphics. You know, the Smart Growth Manual, to me, was an amazing communication device in its simplicity. If you haven't read it, each page is set up with a main idea that it's getting across, very simply stated, a graphic that relays that point, and then 2 or 3 paragraphs of text. You can literally read the Smart Growth Manual in about 10 minutes and get the whole idea of the whole thing. If there's a topic that you need to delve into deeper, you can go deeper. When we wrote the Curbside Chat booklet, we wrote it using that format. And we want to take and write this Understanding Mobility Manual in the same format. So we're going to need some help putting graphics together and identifying those compelling visuals that are going to help us tell our story. And then finally, we're going to need help sharing this message. We have built up quite a network amongst strong towns, amongst the other organizations and people in NextGen, but nothing like we can do if we all share this in our own towns, in our own communities, in our own places, amongst our own friends and our own contacts. And so what we're looking to do to maximize the impact of this report is to coordinate its release, coordinate the release of these case studies, the ongoing dialogue, and really propel this to another level, leveraging all of the connections that we in this room have. So with that, I do want to say, we are asking for people to volunteer. I did want to throw in, there's a little bit of what's in it for me. Besides making the world a better place and doing great things and being involved with a fun project, anybody that does volunteer, we will certainly attribute. They'll get individual recognition, the right to distribute this and duplicate it. In a sense, you'll be an owner of this the way any of us would be. And then I did add in, I know a lot of our younger people especially are in that phase in their career where they're looking for the next job or looking for the first job, unfortunately, in some cases. I know a lot of us, myself included, would be happy to, on LinkedIn, give you a recommendation or, somehow individually recognize or attribute your work, and if that will help you in your career path, I would be happy to do that, and I know that others up here would as well. So with that, if you're interested in this, in the afternoon here, my open source session will deal with this report. If you can't make it to my session, that's fine. If you still want to be involved, you can email me at marone@strongtowns.org, and I will get you into the email group and the website that we put together for working on this project. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Chuck. I want to add that a number of the people who are speaking here now will also be speaking at other sessions throughout the Congress. So, if you like something that Chuck said, you're at a couple other things. Was that right?
Yeah, Thursday afternoon.
Thursday afternoon. So look in your program. You can find more, hear more wisdom from today's bright stars. Is this yours?
Yeah. And it's on auto, so.
Okay. I'll let you hit play.
I actually need to use that. Okay. So let's play just the space bar.
And this is Jen Krause. Should introduce you.
I feel like Bucky Dent coming up to bat after Hank Aaron and Babe Ruth, so you can call me Bucky if you like. You've just heard about 2 initiatives that use NextGen and the CNU overall to advance a particular project within the urbanist movement. I'm going to change gears now and tell you about an initiative that serves other initiatives by making it easier for urbanists with similar interests to connect and get stuff done. And that initiative is known as the Open Source Congress. It's basically an ongoing pop-up Congress that participants create during the annual meeting of the CNU. If you've never participated before, picture it as a marketplace in which people find each other to discuss ideas, challenges, and projects that we wish to advance. You'll get a taste of it today, actually, when we use the open source format this afternoon. What I want to tell you about the Open Source Congress this morning is that it epitomizes the opportunities that are available to us as members of the CNU. Personal initiative and responsibility are all you really need in order to make projects happen in the context of this organization and movement. And similarly, personal initiative and responsibility are the foundation of the open source format. It might seem, to those of you who are new, it might seem inevitable and long established now, but the Open Source Congress was on nobody's agenda until around 2001 when Jennifer Hurley, a fellow member, whom you might meet this week, attended her first CNU. She noticed the sheer amount of talent and experience at the Congress and felt that an opportunity was being lost when there was so little room in the schedule for people to interact. Early Congresses had included a lot more interaction, but by 2001 they had become more of a conventional conference in which collaboration was mostly relegated to the hallways in between sessions. Many members regretted that. Jennifer had attended other conferences in which a format called open space technology was used to create a marketplace for ideas and interaction, and she thought it would be a good fit for the CNU. She suggested it for the first Next Gen program, and the suggestion stuck. Over time, Jen introduced the format at other CNU gatherings and eventually proposed that it become part of the mainstream program of the CNU, but nothing happened with that proposal until a group of Next Geners helped her organize and staff the first Open Source Congress on a volunteer basis. And we changed the name, and it grew incrementally from there. My experience as a CNU volunteer and a recent open source co-chair is that no CNU initiative takes root without the kind of do-it-yourself commitment that the Open Source Congress represents. But just about anything can take root with it. This is blank on purpose because there's no picture to show for what's going on right now. My current initiative that I'm working on, along those lines is probably on its way to demonstrating the same point. For a few years now, I've been suggesting that there are ways of holding a Congress that would be truer to our principles as urbanists than our current model is. Meeting in a convention center is convenient, but it has a way of segregating us from the city that we're in, and when we leave, there's no sign that we've ever been there, which is pretty funny when you consider that this is a gathering of people whose mission is placecraft. I've been sowing this idea throughout the CNU, and I generally meet with nods of agreement, but until recently nothing came of it. As I've mentioned, initiatives only happen when someone cares enough to take responsibility for bringing that idea to life. So that's what I'm doing. 8 weeks ago, I applied to occupy a storefront in downtown North Adams, Mass. During the month of September as part of their infill economic development program. They've assigned us to 107 Main Street, the biggest storefront they have. That storefront's going to be our base for a festival of exhibits and events with a placemaking mission. Mike Lydon and Tony Garcia will be guest curating part of it. Chuck Marone will be presenting. And I'm hoping that many members of the CNU, including some of the people in this room, will take advantage of the opportunity to lead events in collaboration with us and the North Adams community. You can just talk to me if you're interested. The festival is called Imagining North Adams, although you also hear some of the Next Geners refer to it by the nickname Build a Better Congress, because like open source, that's one of the aims of this project. We think that we can have a bigger impact as urbanists if we take advantage of our annual meeting to demonstrate our values through our actions. If you take anything away from watching me launch this initiative or from our presentations today, I hope it will be the encouragement to join an initiative that's working on an issue that you care about, or else start an initiative of your own. If you're unsure of how to begin and want someone to coach you, any of the speakers on today's agenda will be able to fill you with ideas for how to begin. My name's Jennifer Krause, and I was a newcomer to CNU as recently as 2007. I didn't know a soul when I walked into that conference center, and so I'd like to extend a special welcome to the people who are here for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. The next thing we are going to do is a look at the authenticity competition. I don't know if, hopefully you all have heard about this. Last year was the inaugural authenticity competition, which was, CNU was in Madison last year, and there was a program put together to take a part of the city. Jen was mentioning that we often don't leave much of a trace behind when CNU comes and goes. And so some people, most of whom are in this room, decided that there would be a way to do that where we could actually look at what was a place in the city that needed work and pool together some of the creative resources. And so there was a competition to fix up one little piece of Madison. Once again, this year there's an authenticity competition for West Palm Beach, and I believe it's is it Saturday? That does anyone know? Is it going to be on Saturday?
Lunch, I think.
Lunch. Okay, so Saturday lunch. I highly recommend that you check it out. It's I don't know how many entries they've had, but last year was a number of great entries, very dynamic. Panel of judges, and it was a great opportunity, something that we don't often get at CNU, to see the ideas that different people bring on the same site. Because usually someone will present the work that they did, and someone will be presenting from Texas, and someone will be presenting from the work they did in New York, and someone will present the work they did in Montana, and you kind of see different styles and see different things like that, but you don't see how would different people approach the same site. And so it was students, it was professionals, it was a great mix. And it was a very good opportunity within the Congress to hear some of the really great experts that we have look at a project. There were also some local representatives. So they looked at it, they analyzed it for what they thought, and then they ended up picking one. So this year I strongly recommend Saturday's session. But what we're going to do now is we're going to reprise last year's event. Eliza Harris was a part of the winning team, and she's going to present her project. We've got a small panel of jurors is a little harsh, but some people who are going to just offer some critiques and talk about how it's a short competition, but how these ideas can be taken forward and developed, what we'd like to see. And Eliza, I would like also to recognize that Eliza Harris, stand up, and Ed Erfurt. This year there's the big elections for the CNU board, and we've got two people here, Eliza and Ed, who are both tried and true members of Next Gen. They've both had numerous leadership positions here. They've both, they're a big part of why we're at Next Gen 9 right now. So I encourage you, if you haven't already voted, to vote for one or even both of them, and because we like them and we think that they would do a great job on the CNU board. So there's other great candidates, but these two are our own. And with that, I also like to welcome Tony Garcia and Dan Bartman to come up and sit up here and be intimidating for Eliza.
And the reason I've been edging up to the mic is because I was told if we want to have a good critique, I'm going to have to talk fast. So I was part of a much larger team at my office for this project. So all the design work is done by Ken Vanderveer and some other great folks at our office. We've got a guy named Jürgen Duncan, who's our transportation designer, who's just great. This is the site in Madison, Wisconsin that we were all designing to. The blacks in the middle. It is a TOD, potential TOD site. There's proposed commuter rail and streetcar. It's also near a major regional bike path. The black line around the edge is sort of natural barriers that, that enclose a larger district that it's part of, and we did this little analysis to get a sense of what the walk shed for the site was. One thing that we at the office were already kind of excited about was this idea of shared streets. This is Jürgen Duncan, our transportation planner, is from Germany, so he likes to go back and visit and brings us back wonderful pictures. That's actually his wife. And as you can see, this is a shared space where commercial vehicles are in the same space as playground equipment. And I think during certain parts of the day, no cars are allowed at all, but it's one form of a shared street. We were really excited to find out that Madison's sister city, Freiburg in Germany, has some great pedestrian streets, and that liberated us a little bit to look outside the U.S. borders in terms of precedents, while still being true to Madison's character, because they have a strong German character as well as this German sister city. So the title of our project ended up being Woonerf, which is the Dutch word for shared streets. And these are streets where cars are mixed with pedestrians at very low speeds, and design is the primary vehicle to keep cars at those slow speeds where that's a safe endeavor. And it's also a counterpoint to pedestrian-only spaces that have been very problematic in the U.S. Many of them have failed pretty miserably. So the shared streets might be a much better way of getting at this radically different way of organizing ourselves. They can be very commercial. They can also be home zones. You can see the parking here. It doesn't dominate the streetscape even as much as parallel parking does, and it also allows for some larger play areas. And just a couple other examples. And they can bleed into larger piazzas or plazas. And this is some North American examples: California, Vancouver. This is one of Peyton Chung's pictures, and Winter Park in Florida. This is a very recent installation. So on the right, or your left side is primarily the shared street network, as well as a few pedestrian-only network. And the darker roads on the right side are the more conventional streets. Some of the street sections that we looked at, along with some of the precedents we use for those, and they do go down to some streets that are pedestrian only, but the majority of them are shared. And this is the rendering of the project. Another important piece of it was the phasing and trying to get a typology that could be more incremental, where you could have small builders come in and do small buildings, and only at the very end do you get to much larger structures that require potentially structured parking. Also, as Floridians, we were excited to work in Madison, where you can actually go below grade and do some underground parking, which we really can't do in most of Florida because of the water table. So this is the plan, which I'm sure the guys will have more to say about. And like I said, the phasing, a lot of parking spaces coming in at the end. And maybe if by some miracle everyone wakes up and realizes we don't need that much parking, we can reduce that at the last phase. Starting with a first phase that creates a sense of place, and then building on that incrementally until you get to phase 4, which has the larger structures. Just some more analysis diagrams looking at terminated vistas, and really most of these are piazzas, not a ton of green space, but the green space on the edge. And there are some major parks nearby. We thought pretty specifically about what some of these buildings might be, from the transit station to an artist square, and we also broke it down in terms of transect. And if you might be familiar with the T3, T4, T5, the other things are open and limited, which has to do with how much retail you can do. And also, since this competition, we've actually had some people call us who are interested in the idea and implementing it on other sites around the country. As you can see, it's somewhat less romantic once we get to a site with a real developer who's interested in it. And that's in North Carolina, and this is a project that we've been working on for a long time in Florida, where we're still more in the experimental phase and looking at implementing some of these ideas in that project. So back to the rendering, and let me know if you want to see one of the other drawings.
Well, it's an honor to be part of this panel because when you look at this type of work, it's really high quality. And I think this takes, what I found really interesting last year is that this was one of the sessions during the jury that I was in a different session. I saw lots of tweets coming out of the Authentic City competition, and I got up and moved to the next room because it was probably one of the most engaging and not quite controversial, but really inspiring sessions from the guests. But on this plan, this really takes the urbanism that we were all kitched into with the original sort of what CNU is and what new urbanism is, where we have the white picket fences and we have all the little pitched roofs and that. And it takes it to a completely different level, which is really a much more traditional urbanism in this sort of project. So I really appreciated seeing that come forward to the table in this competition. And even the series of drawings, those small diagrams, they don't seem like much, but it really helps to explain how and why are the streets crooked. So anybody that's doing work today and your client doesn't get what you're doing, look at those little diagrams that Eliza has in this piece and try doing some of those and sharing them with your team.
And we got the idea of doing those from Leon Creer and from the Civic Urbanism book that Andres curated.
I mean, yeah, the diagrams definitely help explain the project. I think when you can distill the project into a few simple graphics, it helps us in the 5 minutes that you presented it to understand the project. I really like the going back to the precedent, to the German connection. I think sometimes we get lost in our the urbanism that we want to recreate without thinking about the cultural context. So I really appreciate that. I think that's one of the strongest things of the plan. I'm wondering about the parking. Obviously, that's a big issue, and I see some of it in the rendering. The other example that you showed more parking. The one that you were doing for the actual developer. Where is the parking for this scheme?
There is parking in mid-blocks, and then we also did some, we're anticipating some half a level down, half a level up with the architecture where they would be park under.
Okay.
And then a large amount of parking in a structure at that last phase, as I mentioned.
Right.
And also potentially some phasing in terms of because some of the phases are going to be open at the beginning. If you needed more parking at the beginning, you could use the land that's not built on yet as parking. But it certainly would require something that Americans are not always used to in terms of not having a dedicated parking space that they're going to own for the life of their building.
Right, right. Well, I mean, to the extent that we can reduce that, the project would be stronger. To reduce the parking will always make it stronger, I think. And especially considering the sort of shared space that you're creating here, to really balance it out, you have to, kill that bottom line, or at least reduce it by 50%. But the shared space, I think, it works, and it's better than the pedestrian only in a lot of cases, because you have the balance of pedestrians and cyclists and motorists, and everybody's got to pay attention. And I think that's the safest. That's the safest route that we can go.
And I think we're about, you probably calculated here, but I think we're about 1.3 spaces per unit, which for us is radically low.
Right.
But I'm very much in favor. I'm a high cost of free parking addict, so I'm very much in favor of going.
I recognize that the ratio is low for our standards,
culture.
but since we're here, let's take it even lower. Why not?
But you don't build that parking deck at the end, and that ratio plummets also.
Right. So there's a hidden time bomb, right?
Yeah.
Is that the idea? I like that.
Can we take questions? Or Dan?
I had one question to ask. I'm about to lose my voice, so I'll be brief. But you brought up a couple other projects that Canaan had been working on that are similar to this proposal, and I was wondering what it's like to try and convince the public that a WUNRF is a good idea.
Well, we haven't actually taken this in front of a public audience yet. We did. A municipal planner who saw this presentation in Madison actually went back home and went to one of their developers and said, you've got to get these guys to try to do this concept on your project. And that was the first drawing that we had. So from a municipal planner, they actually really liked it. The second project, it's still on our boards back at the office, so we haven't had that challenge yet. But our developer is interested in it, and there's, with the changing demographics and the changing economy, the idea of doing single-family rental really jives with this, and you can start to do things that were not possible with a full ownership model.
Yeah, and somebody that's working in the public sector, all you have to do to go to a community, you can see that there isn't a main arterial through the project, that car sewer is outside the project. But within these projects, all you have to do is show people that within that area that you're describing as the street in the one-off, that you're actually getting multiple benefits out of that. It's more than just getting the car through, you're getting the bicyclist through, you've got lower speeds, you've got open space associated with it, there's utilities that go underneath that. So you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. The development community, all you have to do is show them that you've saved them 10 to 20 feet of area that they weren't going to be able to sell. You're able to get 12 more units because you've reduced all of the potential right-of-way pieces. So it can be done. It's a matter of doing these small diagrams. And it was amazing in Madison last year watching all of the local Madison people. This was something they couldn't even conceive. And after they talked about it amongst themselves, it was sort of like the expectation, why aren't we doing this more? So it's really starting that conversation, and I think showing projects like this make that possible.
And also the existing proposal on the site was much bigger and blockier, which meant it had to be built all at once, which under the new economy was just impossible. Yeah, Ian was... Mm-hmm. This is 2 miles from the Capitol. So the question was, there's a lot of single-family homes around there. Is there a market for multifamily? For one thing, we did look at some more townhouses and smaller flat-over-flat models that might be more a better fit than the more blocky original plan that was on the site. But to some extent, we were given the program by the competition and by the previous proposal on the site. I do have I've talked to a developer in Florida who says he goes into these small towns. And no matter how small by percentage of the market is, if he builds a small multifamily project, there's always a market for it. So I think there is justification, especially with the potential with the TOD coming through for market in this area, but we didn't do a market analysis. David? Mm-hmm. It's massive and terrible.
Those are the affordable units, right?
I think there was actually on-street parking on that road, even though it is kind of gigantic and awful. We did put some higher story buildings on that edge with limited retail allowed, mainly because we didn't see people hanging out there, so we treated it as a hard edge that we weren't really facing onto significantly, but so we just dealt with it as best we could. I mean, it's been sort of niceified as much as possible for a 6-lane huge arterial.
I want to say something. One second, just on this diagram in particular, you could sacrifice the green along the rail right of way. I'm not so sure that I'm not convinced that that's really civic space or open space, but the winning part of this plan is the right of way, the shared space. So you can actually see this diagram in a different form where all the streets are green because that's what it is. That's civic space. Yeah. So I mean, part of it is changing the conversation. It's not green space, it's civic space and open space.
And that's really what this center diagram here was getting at. I mean, none of those spaces except that one on the edge are green. Right. The green space is up against the rail right of way, so for what it's worth. Figured it would be more pleasant to hang out by the rail right of way than by that road. Right. Because actually one of our competitors put all the green space on the roadway, and it was just, that would be a miserable place to be.
And I think everybody should take from this that if you're sitting at home and you know how to do this, and your boss says, oh, they'll never believe that, or the developer says that this will never happen, I think you should sit down and take the time and draw something like this up and start sharing it. Because this is, nobody would have thought that this would be the thing that really inspired folks in Madison. This was, you know, there were other projects that were much more orthogonal and organized, like the existing neighborhood. But this has inspired a lot of discussion in other projects. So take the time to present these ideas and draw them up.
And I think it's about time we have to move on to the next presentation. I do want to thank the Authenticity Competition for putting this together, because I have a question from the organizer of the competition. Russ? And the reason this competition is so important is because the Charter Awards are real projects and they have all the constraints of real projects. This was great for us because we got to think outside the box in a way we don't get to think outside the box every day on the projects we're working on. But then we actually, after winning the competition, we can go back to our clients and say, well, a lot of people think this is a great idea, and then we can start to actually push the box at home as well. So thanks, Russ, for putting it together, and thanks, Will, for inviting me to speak today.
Okay, thank you to Eliza and Tony and Ed and Dan.
So we have to pay a little thumb drive relay here. Yes. I'm not sure which one it's on. Let's go with this one first. Too bad.
That's a good question. It's like this is Brad Korshoff.
It's the keynote. Is that keynote?
This is Joe Nickel.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for all your work in pulling this together. As Will mentioned, my name is Joe Nickel. I'm from up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been working with Urban Design Associates for about 8 years now, really focusing on urban regeneration projects in our kind of gateway first-tier cities, as well as our second and third-tier cities, both domestically and abroad. And for the last about 8 years or so, I've been working with a good friend and colleague, Atul Sharma, who's here in the second row, and we've been thinking about where we're headed as kind of a broad group of people, as a broad industry, and where we might be headed in the future vis-a-vis the things that we were seeing happening around us in Pittsburgh, and then in the conversations that we all have been having together over the years. So we've broken our presentation really into two parts. This morning, we're really going to talk about what we have observed over the past couple of years, and what it amounts to after listening to the great presentations we've had this morning is more or less an assimilation of what we've heard. And you know, my hope would be that at the end of the 10 minutes or so, you'd be like, well, of course, that's what's going on. We've heard it time and time again. And then we're going to break out, and in the afternoon, in one of these open source sessions, really figure out what that means in terms of a kind of emerging third-tier city where the amount of disinvestment has reached critical levels but where we feel the amount of potential and the ability for a group like ours to have a real impact is a real possibility. So we hope you can make it back for that. So if we listen to what we've been hearing this morning, and it's been great stuff, and the context for why we're here in West Palm Beach this week, there seems to be this emerging consensus that CNU, now in its 20th year, and really New Urbanism in its 30th year as an idea, is at a point where we can step back, call time out a little bit, and ask ourselves, given what's going on in the world, where we think we're headed and how we might move on from here. I think it's important that when we're looking at these, at this important juncture that we find ourselves in, that we just remind ourselves how far we've come. We've done an amazing job as a group, and in particular the folks that we inherited so much experience and still get to partner with from, they have gone a long ways in kind of resetting the conversation. And we've inherited a great deal of not only wisdom and intellectual capability, but they, I think, have elevated the kind of global discussion, certainly the national dialogue about where we're headed. So whereas before we were building communities on the left, New Urbanism and CNU as an extension of that really emerged as a kind of response to the kind of antisocial and anti-environmental attributes of the image on the left, so that we could create this new diagram in city as art, in engaging the middle class, engaging suburban expansion of our cities. So whereas it had become common practice to impoverish our public realm to this degree, kind of making collectors for vehicles, we're now almost as a matter of fact building collectors for people. And so we've retaught ourselves this kind of lexicon and vocabulary for how to make great streets and how to make buildings and places that plug into them that make these places memorable, lovable, and worth caring about. We've also done a fantastic job as a group in re-emerging people in the discussion and understanding of how they use their public environment. Not too long ago, and in still many environments that we're probably familiar with, this is how people are forced to engage with their public environment. This woman, this is in Virginia Beach, where, as a matter of fact, they're actually thinking of expanding this road. Chuck, you'd be interested in having that conversation with them. But this woman almost has to apologize for being out in the public realm and engaging with her peers that happen to be zooming around in their Tacomas and in other vehicles. So we've done a great job as a group in re-emerging people in public spaces that they care about, giving them the kind of dignity and purpose for interacting with their public and built environment in ways that I think we sometimes take for granted. I know in our generation we can easily take this for granted, but this was a huge accomplishment. It should not go overlooked, and I know we don't, but when we start thinking about where we go from here, we have to always remind ourselves where we came from. But while we were making great strides both in intellectual investments, physical investments, economic investments in these areas, we were defaulting on our obligations back in the cities. And so where it had become commonplace to operate kind of in the protected, secure environments that we could create and write our own zoning for and bring in our own population, identify our own clients almost, this is what we left in the wake. So this is an image in Detroit. While we were reframing the idea of transit-oriented development, policy had moved to a point where it was okay to let our transit-oriented development that was working far better than anywhere in the world in the early 1900s go into near ruin. And it's almost to the point where some of the, kind of at a gut level, we're at a point where the folks that in the late 60s that were developing Rensen in Detroit, we've in some respects taken the same attitude, that we have to create this type of fortress because what's right outside our front door is too tough to deal with. And so we've been struggling with that as a group. And when we have tried to take suburban solutions or solutions that we've developed as a group and tried to import them into the city as part of a way of reimagining the city or regrowing the city, we've run into problems. And this could easily be a convention center. It could be anything that's kind of quote-unquote silver bullet solutions. But the bottom line is we were searching for those solutions while trying to fix these problems, and it just wasn't working. I mean, I guess you could say that they were trying to create a stopgap for folks flocking down to the south looking for these kinds of communities, when in reality we had not given them much reason to stay there in the first place. So that's really what we're trying to do. So why we were letting main streets all over America, and particularly post-industrial America, literally just kind of deteriorate before our eyes, we were building great, highly sophisticated, very thought out and well-tenanted main streets and commercial centers just outside of these languishing areas. And this is happening at all scales. I mean, whether you're in Reston or Dadeland or anywhere, we've achieved a great and high level of urbanism and sophistication in all sorts of scales and all sorts of arenas. But again, it was always about a highly controlled environment, because it was much easier to go out into Fairfax County and build Reston Town Center than at the time was it to go into the Central District of Columbia and try to fix the very urban issues that were forcing people out there in the first place. And I imagine the same was true in Dadeland, but I don't know as much about that. So and it's not just a uniquely American problem. For those of you that are working internationally know we're constantly looked at for kind of emerging trends and models. So you get a project like this, where on paper this might perform very well as kind of a rank and file new urbanist project in terms of how it deals with street connectivity, neighborhoods, districts, mixed use, transportation. It does all fairly well in that regard, but what this project represents, which may not be so evident in just looking at it, is this is Georgia on the Caspian Sea. They are siphoning all of their urban life and relocating it right here on some of their most environmentally sensitive land out on the Caspian Sea. This is their kind of state or country-wide effort to reposition their economy in the Middle East. And so we ask ourselves, are our cities really disposable? It's amazing that, just going back a bit, it's amazing that in a time when our disruptions to the environment and economies has reached such a level that these ideas still gain much weight. But this is, in fact, being financed and built. So the idea that cities are not disposable, I think, is emerging as an important idea for us as we move into the next kind of iteration for this group here. And so what Tool and I have been thinking about, and what we encourage all you to think about, is that one of our next challenges, and we wouldn't want to say this is our only next challenge, but our next challenge or opportunity really, is that to translate this theory that we've been able to perfect in highly controlled environments out in new projects outside of our cities, and bring that back to the field. And by field we mean our cities, our neighborhoods, our towns, both the gateway cities and the cities that support them at different levels. So this is not a new idea. In fact, this is a returning to the idea that was laid out in the first chapter of the preamble of the Charter for New Urbanism. The eventual goal for New Urbanism was always to get back to the city, to develop this balance between the edge and the center of our communities as a way of challenging ourselves to address the interrelated community building challenge. So this step is really the next logical step in doing that. And the great thing is, this is already happening. It's happening mostly in our gateway cities right now. This is in P Street in Washington, D.C., whereas 10, 15 years ago, Reston Town Center could not solve this problem. They couldn't figure it out. Now, enterprising developers, designers, and generations of people moving back into the city are activating these places. This is a great spot to be. Just 5, 6, 7 years ago, you wouldn't walk down there. But this is humming all times of the day. We all know the kind of who's who in urban regeneration projects. New York, Highline in New York, of course, being amongst the most expensive ways of doing it. And even in Pittsburgh, of all places, where we are finally figuring out how to live in our city. This used to be, 50 years ago, a place where you'd have to wear 2 shirts during the day because your collar would get so dark because of the smoke in the air. And now people are, for the first time, living and breathing and engaging their public spaces in a way that they never have before. It's really, really exciting to see. But as the gateway cities kind of reach their carrying capacity, and they are, and we're already seeing, like in the Pittsburgh region, for instance, that we, as a kind of a supportive economy to the broader national economy, we're capturing a much bigger share of jobs than cities much bigger than us. So there is this kind of general trend as housing prices and cost of living get so high that people are starting to relocate to these other urban environments that can still offer the same quality of life. We find that there's an insufficient toolkit for how these secondary and tertiary cities might respond to the influx of investment that is coming their way, because they're so well positioned regionally and economically in a broader economic unit that it's only a matter of time before we have to start figuring this out, and we propose that time is now. So what are some of the kind of broad realities that we have to deal with when we're kind of reimagining our urban practice to deal with these very real problems of second and third tier cities? Well, this idea that we can create a master plan, wire it so tightly, and then expect it to be built out over 5, 6, 7, 8 phases without it even changing, I think is largely in the past. We now are in a position where we have to create that framework, but then we have to populate it with the strength of resilience, adaptability, creating the kind of urban redundancies that have been gained and we've been learning about over time that make these really strong places that can adapt to changes that we can't even predict, kind of the unknown unknown. And this is important because no longer are we in a period of 6, 7, 8, 9% growth year over year over year. We're now in a slow growth, or maybe even in some regions a no growth scenario, where what we build today has to make sense today. We can no longer kick the can down the road and expect what we build tomorrow to pay for the shortfall. So this is great work by Urban 3, looking at just how different land uses generate revenue back to the public to support their being there in the first place. And we really need to be in the green side of this, whether you're in a gateway city such as New York, Chicago, whatever, but also making that same kind of economic decision at our second and third tier cities. We've overdrafted our natural and financial bank accounts. And this idea that the $500,000 charrette that we've all kind of grown very comfortable with is going to necessarily need to reshape itself and mold into a form that deals with relationships with our clients in a much different way. Whereas before it was common just to get in a kind of one and done planning scenario for 6, 8, maybe 12 months, pile in a bunch of stuff, wire it up, you're good to go for 20 years. The model might be shifting. It might be such as one of my former colleagues, Ray Gindros, has done with the cities like Norfolk, Virginia. It might be a 10, 15, career-long engagement with the places that we care about, incrementally working with folks at a very small level so that we're not creating one big vision for how we might drastically transform a city, a region, a neighborhood, but that we're making a lot of small plans. Mike did a great job of explaining the work that his team's been doing along that same respect. So we have to believe that we are absolutely the best generation to be able to do this. I mean, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. They've taught us so much, and they continue to teach us so much, and this conference and Congress is really a testament to that we have a great potential to continue to leverage those relationships, not to forget them, not to say, you guys are doing it all wrong, you don't know what you're doing, we know best, but really to build on the hard work that they've done over their entire career and continue to partner with them. Simultaneous to that, there's this whole demographic wave happening where we're starting to, not only us as designers thinking cities are cool, but our peers and colleagues who are well outside the design world are starting to figure out how it is to live in cities and the strengths in doing so. It's much cooler now to own the newest smartphone than it is to own a car. So we're in this kind of generational move back to cities that makes this a highly potent combination. And then lastly, as has been mentioned a number of times, we're much better situated to hyper-connect with one another, both digitally and face-to-face. I mean, this conference, or this ninth Congress today, Congress within a Congress, is testament to that. I mean, you all would not have come here a day early or taken time out of some of the other events had you not been so willing to collaborate and come together in a highly intertwined way. So that's very powerful when we're thinking about how we move forward. And so this isn't a hypothetical situation. I mean, as you saw this morning, and you'll see throughout the course of the week, all of us are doing things that I think, if we were to think about them, kind of fit into this larger context of moving back into cities, whether it's the kind of tactical urbanism, open streets stuff, or even reinstituting some of the Hope 6 stuff that really was always New Urbanists' way of interacting with cities with strong HUD support, and then obviously Chuck's work in the curbside chats that are picking up momentum every day. So that brings us to this afternoon, and I just want to give you a brief teaser on this. Atul mentioned that I should point you to the small little video that we made, so if you have time over the next hour or two, you can check it out. Will, when's the Braddock session? It's like 2:45 or something? 2:45. So at 2:45, we're gonna take a look at a city that's near and dear to us. You saw some pictures of us, Braddock, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh, as a way of not only testing how what the criteria might be for readdressing these small towns and these emerging centers that are coming back to life, but also to use that as an opportunity to better understand where we might be headed as an industry. So I'm just going to click this up here. Of course, you can't see it. There is a video on this site, if I can learn how to use Keynote and get it in the... No, it's actually Sense. We're not very clever people. Sense was taken, so we did Sense. So if you... I still can't see it, but it's streetsense.org, and it's the top link, and there's a short video that kind of gives you a context for what we'll be talking about this afternoon. Hopefully you guys can make it, and thanks very much for your attention.
Okay, with that, we come to our break. I want to just say before we do, remind people that there is going to be open innovation, which is one of the new steps in the open Congress. That's going to be in 1J, which I believe is on the other side of the center. So that's on Friday and Saturday, right next door to 1K, where open source will be going on. So more of the collaborative and smaller presentations will be going on there, and it'll be worth your time. We are about 20 minutes late, which is because we had some good stuff today. So we'll try to take like a 10-minute, 12-minute break and get back here at 10 to 11, 10:50, and we'll make up some time before lunch. So see you soon. Yeah. Let's see if I can.
Howdy. If everybody would, who wants to hang around, start to return to your seats. Will was gracious enough to let me offer to do a little bit of a warm-up as everybody's coming back from the break. So while Will's going out and herding everybody, why don't y'all head in and we'll get ready to keep on moving. I know, I'll give it a second. But I don't have enough time to give it too many seconds. Okay, so part of being a warm-up is that we're going to try and be fun and exciting and see if I can get the crowd to come back, because that would be awesome. So we're going to start by talking about some economics, and I'll just introduce myself really quick. My name is Andrew Burleson. I am a managing partner of Fourth Environment LLC, which is a small consulting firm in Houston. I help small developers build cool stuff that they normally wouldn't be able to figure out how to build, so that's kind of fun. And I'm also president of the CNU Houston chapter and trying to bring urbanism to the last city on earth that wants it, which is kind of an interesting challenge. So that's me. So we're going to talk about some economics. Everybody here is familiar with supply and demand, right? Does everybody feel like they know? We're going to do some audience participation, and so for that to actually work, y'all have to actually participate. So I need a volunteer to stand up immediately. Just anybody in the room, stand up. Okay, what's your name? Evan, what's your favorite color? Okay, perfect. Thanks. That's it. That's good. So we need that kind of stuff. Just be unashamed and stand up and do stuff. So what you see on the screen in front of you right now is a half-gallon of Bluebell's mint chocolate chip ice cream. And if you don't know, this is the finest ice cream on the planet Earth. Okay, this is really exceptionally outstanding ice cream. And we're going to pretend for a second that I actually have a freezer suitcase with a half-gallon of this with me, and that I want to give it to somebody in this room. Now remember, I just told you this is the absolute best ice cream in the entire world. So how many people would potentially like to have it? Just raise your hand if you'd like it. Okay. So that's great, because it's really worth it. You should all go buy some later. But I only have one imaginary carton here, so we need a way to figure out who should get it, right? So let's try a little auction, right? I'm going to call out some prices. And when the price gets too rich for your blood and you're not interested anymore, put your hand down. As long as you still think, for that price, I'd still want it, keep your hand up. So how many of you would say, I'd take it for $1? Just hold your hand up. All right, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8. 50? 8? Oh, someone in the back. Okay, $8.50. That's the price of Bluebell ice cream today. So what we did there is we used price to bring supply and demand into balance, right? We had a supply of one, and at the price of $8.50, there's only one more person in this room who's still interested, right? So that's pretty fair. Everybody else is like, forget it, that's too much. And the person in the back who's got the ice cream is real happy and, feels like that worked out. So this is how we know what the correct price is. And this is how supply and demand works. For most goods, when you have a typical level of differentiation, meaning it's basically most regular things where, like ice cream, there's other kinds of ice cream that are still ice cream. They're maybe not the best on the planet, but, for $8.50 you could go buy like 3, things at Kroger of, average ice cream, and so, why pay more? That's the case for typical products. But it's interesting to look at things at the ends of the supply and demand differentiation spectrum. So let's talk about coffee for a second. How many people in this room like coffee? Okay, awesome. Everybody likes coffee. So I want to figure out how much I should have to pay for a pound of raw coffee beans. I'm going to need you guys to help me. So I'm going to just give you a hint. I'm going to say it costs $2 a pound for you to grow coffee, and we're going to pretend right now that everyone in the room is a coffee grower. You've all got 100 pounds left of inventory to sell, and Walmart and Starbucks and all those guys have already got all the coffee they need for this year, and so it's time for us to sell our last coffee. I'm the last buyer in the market, okay? I'm the last guy, but I happen to need 100 pounds, and I want to get the best price per pound that I can get. So it costs you $2 to sell, or to grow it. So somebody make me an offer. How much will you sell me your coffee for? Anybody, shout a number. $250. Anybody want to beat $250? Remember, you're losing at least $200 if you don't sell this to me right now. So, and I'm going to ask you for a check after the presentation's done. $225. Anybody else? Maybe you needed to have your coffee this morning. $210. We got $210. Anybody want to beat $210? $201. Okay, that's good enough. I'm not going to make you lose money. So that's kind of how this works, right? In a situation where you have something that's interchangeable, coffee beans are beans are beans are beans. They haven't been Starbucksed yet, so these are just raw beans. It's a commodity, and that means that the supply side of the equation basically controls the price. In this case, there's a lot more supply available, which means the price got very, very low, just to basically right above cost. It turns out, just in case you're curious, the market value of coffee beans is actually about $3 right now. So on the spectrum of differentiation, commodities are on the low end. They're basically things that are interchangeable. Supply is what determines the price. Let's look at something totally different. This is Jackson Pollock number 5. Now, how many people really like modern art? So now there's a lot less demand for modern art than there was for coffee. So what do you think? Should this cost more or less than coffee? Okay. Well, so we're going to do this again. Let's quickly pretend we're going to have a little art auction here, and I'm going to just see who wants this in this room. Who would want this? So pretend you're actually yourself and you have your actual resources. Would anybody want to buy this painting from me? Okay. All right, so just call it a number. What's your offer? $100. $1,000. Anybody want to go higher than $1,000? $1,200? $1,200. $20,000. Okay, we're just going to say sold. Okay. Okay, right. So 20. Well, but no, this is the whole world, right? We're all on an island. Just this room is bidding. So 20,000. Hey, that's a great deal, right? So how many people think that this is actually worth $20,000? How many say it's worth more? Raise your hands. How many say it's worth less? Okay. Nobody's wrong. Everything is worth what it's purchasable. We'll pay for it, right? So it turns out the last time that this was on sale, it was sold for $140 million. And yeah. But the reason is because in this room we only have a certain number of people with a certain amount of resources who are able to compete for it. But the last time this was on sale, it's well known enough that it was offered to the entire world, and some crazy Russian guy had that much money he was willing to part with in exchange for this ink splatters. So that's the other end of the differentiation scale. In this case, there's only one. This is a totally unique good. There's nothing else like it. And so basically the demand is what determines the price. There was somebody to whom this was worth $140 million, and so that's what it's worth, even if there's only one person who feels that way. So that's supply and demand. So we know that supply and demand determines price. But one final thought on this is something I think people don't usually think of is it's exactly the same thing to say that availability versus desirability equals value. I think as designers, we get into this mindset a lot of times about, prices, like prices are too high, maybe prices are too low, whatever it may be. But prices are neither good nor bad. They just are. They're just an indicator of what something is worth. So if a price is not what you think it should be, then that means there's either more or less availability or desirability, right? And so think about that the next time you hear somebody say, for instance, housing is too expensive. Okay, does that mean it's too desirable, or does that mean it's too or not available enough? Like, what of those things does it mean? Because the price in and of itself is neither good nor bad. Okay, so now that everybody's warmed up, we're going to talk about today a framework. This is called the Net Attraction Framework. And what this framework attempts to explain is how urban design affects property values. Now, I'm going to try and cover this in 20 minutes, which I don't know if that's actually possible, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And in order to do this, I'm going to go really fast, and I'm going to not do some things I normally do. Normally, I stop for lots of questions throughout the presentation and do about 30 minutes of Q&A afterwards. I'm supposed to already have been done talking, by now, so we're not going to do a long-term Q&A afterwards. But instead, I passed out these cards. I think everybody should have gotten a card that says Net Attraction Framework Feedback. So if you have a question or comment or something you want to send to me, you can write your contact information. Just fill this out and give it to me, and I'll email you back an answer to whatever questions you have at some point, maybe after the Congress, but I promise I will respond to every card that I get. I also gave you a cheat sheet of terms, because we're going to rattle through some terminology, and I'll explain to you why it matters, but I don't want you to be busy trying to frantically take notes, because there's no way you can possibly keep up. So just pay attention, drink from the fire hose, and let's go. So the framework is a series of observations that are meant to, again, explain how urban design affects property values. The first observation is this. There's two kinds of land. And we're pretty comfortable with this. There's rural land, and we think, yeah, it looks like this out in the country. And there's urban land. Okay, cool, it's built up. But actually, it has nothing to do with character, but how we determine the value. That's what makes the difference between urban and rural land. And in economic terms, there's only these two types. Rural land is land that we value for resource production, like we're going to grow corn on it and sell the corn, so that's where the value of the land comes from. Urban land is valued for what it's going to occupy it, or what we're going to develop on it. And that's an important distinction, because for rural production, that means that location is essentially insignificant, which means rural land is a commodity. And for development, or urban land, location is really significant, and that means that urban land is a unique asset. So that kind of gives us an interesting second observation about uniqueness, which is we just talked about commodities versus unique assets. Well, because urban property is unique, that basically means for any particular spot on planet Earth in an urban setting, supply is one. And so demand is what's determining value. So the question is, what would cause people to demand a piece of property? Well, that demand you can think of as how many people would like to occupy it. How many people, if you gave them the chance, would like the chance to own it or occupy that space? And I like to call that attraction. I like to think of it as a force, kind of like gravity. How many people are drawn to a particular place? So we can see that attraction is the basis of urban property values, the ability of a place to draw people in who would like to compete with their dollars for the right to have it. So what is attraction? So let's try and understand a little bit of how that works. So I got a quick question for you. Let's say you had to move tomorrow and you had to pick one of these two cities, Chicago or Charleston. So how many people say Chicago? Okay, how many people say Charleston? Okay, so we've got kind of a split. Some people who said Chicago, give me a few reasons why. Urban density, family, transit systems, fresh water, baseball, music. Okay, perfect. Okay, some people who said Charleston, what are some reasons? Food, beautiful, weather. What was that? Density. So density twice. Okay, cool. All right. This is interesting. You guys all just tossed out a bunch of reasons. These are all perfectly valid reasons. What's really interesting is all of your reasons fell into one of four categories. you're all responding to one of 4 environments. And those are the natural environment, the economic environment, the social environment, and the built environment. So I like the weather. I think I can get a job there. It doesn't cost as much to live. That's where my family is. I like the food. I like the culture. Or, you know, I like the density. I like the transit. I like the way the environment is. And what's interesting is I've given this presentation a half dozen times or maybe more, but I've never had anyone be able to come up with a reason that isn't in one of these 4 categories. So if you can think of one that's not in one of these 4, please write that on your feedback form. This is something that's, you know, ever evolving, and I'd be interested to hear your feedback on this. But I think this pretty much encompasses everything. There's one important distinction, though. This is the natural environment. Okay, we're cool with that. This is the built environment. Okay. But this is also the built environment. So when I talk about the difference between natural and built, I mean the difference between spontaneous ecology and anything man-made. And one other important point is that the 4 environments are inseparably interconnected. They influence us and we influence them. And they influence us with regards to property values in this way, that they attract us toward or repel us away from places. But it's interesting to also look at the way the 4 environments are is not exactly the same, which brings us to the 4th observation here. So there's a difference between the way the first 3 environments attract us and the way the last one attracts us. And the difference is this. The first 3 environments influence us indirectly. For instance, all the reasons that you guys just shouted out are reasons why you might want to be in Chicago over Charleston or Charleston over Chicago. And if you dig in a little further, maybe you want to live where the schools are better, or maybe you want to live close to the water, or maybe you want to live close to work. Those are all things that are sort of narrowing you down into kind of a neighborhood. But when you finally pick, I want to buy this house versus this house, it's like, I like that kitchen better, right? I prefer the parking in the back, or I feel like the street that this is on is better than the other street. So the first 3 things help you sort of narrow down your parameters. And the last one is usually the final decision-making difference, why on one given block you might pick between 2 houses that were next door to each other and say, I want this one instead of that one. So if you take the indirect attraction and the direct attraction together, you get net attraction, which is the name of the framework. And the idea is basically this net attraction, which this can be positive or negative from all 4 environments. The net attraction that a property has is basically the same thing as its value. And this gives us an interesting idea here, which is that direct attraction, this is the thing we have the most control over. Now, just a real brief segue, I don't have time to fully go into this, but think about also our control level. If you have a social problem and you say, like, we need to fix the schools, well, it's not like you can go in there with duct tape and a hammer and just take care of it. Like, you know, hire somebody by the hour and just, it's done, it's fixed. You can take actions that you hope will lead in the direction of better schools, but they can't just be fixed, right? If you have a leaky faucet, you can grab a plumber and just fix it, right? So it's different. There's a direct relationship, a tangible one-to-one concreteness in the built environment that's not present in the other environments. And so now to people in this room, that's like, hey, great, all the stuff we do actually matters. And that's what I'm trying to say. So to show how this matters, how the built environment is our chance to change the equation, I'm going to show you an example of a neighborhood. This is the Montrose neighborhood in Houston. This is where I live. This is a 1930s era neighborhood. And it was originally pretty consistent, but now it's become very diverse because of a lot of abandonment and successive redevelopment and just different changes. So here we have one block, and the houses on this block are appraised at about $100 a foot. Now these are actually pretty new, and they're actually very nice on the inside. But you know, you can kind of look at it and get an impression of, okay, all right, I see what it is. This is the same street 2 blocks further down in an area that was built just a little bit differently and stayed a little bit more intact. So these are older homes for the most part. This is appraised at $165 a foot. So it's 65% more valuable. This people who live here have the same jobs. They will go to the same, well, maybe not the exact same jobs, but they work in the same part of town. Their kids go to the same schools. They hang out at the same restaurants and parks and everything else. But within 2 blocks of each other, houses are 65% more valuable. And actually, what you can't see, there's only one sort of newer townhome poking out of the picture. But behind the trees, these houses that are on this street are actually pretty old, and a lot of them in actually bad physical condition. So it's actually really interesting that the new houses are worth 65% less per foot, not in total value, but per foot, so controlling for size. So do you see a difference between these 2 pictures? Do you intuitively sense a difference there? Let's look at one more that's a little bit more interesting. This is, again, 2 blocks apart. This is the first house. This is a 3,000 square foot red brick box built in 1930. This is appraised at $75 a foot, and this is the street that it's on. Okay, this is 2 blocks over, another 3,000 square foot red brick box that appraises for $140 a foot, which is twice the value. This is a same brick box, same size, same neighborhood, same schools, same shops, all the same amenities, but this is the street that it's on. So we see a difference. You can sense a difference. And this is the idea of the framework here. This is common sense pattern recognition. This is not some brilliant, deduction via calculus, which I suck at. So this is not, crazy math. This is just looking at things and trying to recognize patterns. And the first pattern that we see here is that when you've got equivalent indirect attraction, the natural, social, economic factors are the same, but greater direct attraction, you get more value, right? So that leads to a question, which is, there's lots of things we could do to improve the built environment. So what could we do to get the most bang for our buck? How can we focus our effort if we wanted to maximize direct attraction? Well, if we want to ask that question, it helps to try and break down the built environment and understand what it's made of and see if maybe the different pieces behave differently. And it turns out when you're looking at the effect on property values, you can group every component of the built environment into one of three categories, which are cores, interfaces, and conduits. And the simplest example of this is your conventional house. The core is the private realm. It's be the inside of the house, but it would also be the backyard, all the privately visible and accessible space. The interface is the public realm, the space in between, the publicly visible and accessible space. So that would be the front yard, the sidewalk, but it would also be the facade. So it doesn't matter. It's not an issue of ownership. It's an issue of visibility and accessibility. And then a conduit is a fixed pathway. So any kind of infrastructure, utilities, things like that, also streets sometimes. But streets are an interesting case because they can be kind of a hybrid. And there's a really easy way to tell. This is a bus lane in Barcelona. And if you'll notice, the pedestrians who are standing here are in desperate fear of their lives, trying not to fall off the edge of this curb. And I was the only person insane enough to go step out into this street to take a picture of it like this. Okay, but I managed to just barely dodge the bus, so it worked out. Okay, this is also a bus lane. This is in Denver. Okay, this pedestrian is just chilling out, no problem, not afraid of the buses at all. Okay, that's because this is a conduit, move or you die. This is an interface. It's meant to be experienced by people. It's built for people. Okay, so that's the critical litmus test if you have a hard time distinguishing which is which. Okay, so we've got cores, interfaces, and conduits, and we use these things to manipulate attraction. Okay, we build a building, we expect it to add value to a piece of property. So we're manipulating the direct attraction of that particular piece of land as compared to something vacant next door. And it's interesting because once you start to think of the built environment in these terms, you start to see patterns. And that's what we're going to try and dive through as quick as we can and see how far we can get. So I'm going to talk to you about the first pattern. This is in Midtown Houston. We're going to compare two apartment buildings. They're both basically the same size, same rental unit configuration, similar prices. And they were built in the same time in a neighborhood that was very kind of forgotten. It was a neighborhood that was become mostly vacant. And these were sort of first wave revitalization projects. So we've got Post and Camden. And this is what the facade looks like at Post. This is what it looks like at Camden. This is how the parking garage is handled at Post. This is how the parking garage is handled at Camden. Notice that this is sort of tucked away behind sort of the layering, and it doesn't take up a very large percentage of the street, whereas this takes up 2 blocks. This is the sidewalks at Post, and you can see they really just did everything right here. And these are the sidewalks at Camden. These are okay, but you can see this space is very small, actually not easy to pass through space. If you're in a wheelchair, you'd have a real hard time squeezing through here. And one little small soapbox thing, don't do this. This little piece of grass, just don't do it. Okay, this is a betrayal. This says, I live and die in the suburbs and have only ever designed suburban things. And so I think that a building isn't a building without a moat of grass. This is the leasing office at Post. And this is the leasing office at Camden. And that's the story, okay? Built for people, built for cars. And this is the difference. This map is hard to digest in a short amount of time, so I'll just really briefly summarize it for you. Around Post, this is Houston, there's no requirement to build any kind of quality interface. But Post built great interface, and the people around them in some directions extended that because they intuitively sensed the value. And in the directions where they extended that, redevelopment spread. And in the directions where they did not extend it, redevelopment stopped. Camden has crappy interface. Basically nothing interesting happened around it. This is a U-Haul self-storage, so it looks like a 2-block redevelopment in the second wave, but it's really a self-storage center, so I don't know if that really counts. The saddest thing of all, though, is that while it's fairly obvious to see which of these projects is more compelling, and you kind of can intuitively look at it and see I like it better, It's clear that Post sparked much, much, much more revitalization. But this is a light rail station right here. Okay, Camden should have been the home run in Houston, but it wasn't. So we can see some observations here. When you have similar cores and conduits but very different interfaces, we have the Post property versus the Camden property. We can see that the interface has a greater difference or greater impact on surrounding property values than cores or conduits do. And actually, if we were to take this out over many more case studies and look at it, we begin to see a bigger pattern which holds up at basically every scale from the adjacent level, like properties next door, to the surrounding block, to the surrounding neighborhood. Interface has the biggest effect of any manipulator on property values. So let's quickly plow through one more case to see some other ramifications this has. We're going to look at the east side of downtown Houston. This in the 70s. Basically 20 blocks of nothing but surface parking. Is pretty bad, and the city wanted to try and do something about it. So they began to throw things at this problem, and they started with the convention center. And they expanded. They built the convention center, basketball stadium, hotel, or basketball arena, whatever, hotel, convention, hotel, baseball stadium. They built all these things, and yet no private sector redevelopment was happening. And in 2009, they did something that really began to change the equation, and that is they built a park. So to see the difference it makes, the park is called Discovery Green. Let's look at what happened before. This is the convention center. Okay. This is the convention center hotel. There's no interface here. This is the basketball arena. There's some, but what you can't really see is that this across the street is a blank wall parking garage. And here, this is really sad, we have a terminated vista. This is really interesting. In Houston, we have almost a perfect block pattern. There's virtually zero interruptions. So here we have a chance for a really interesting terminated vista. And in a real city, when you have one of those, you do something like this. But in Houston, we put our garbage docks there. I mean, seriously. So we have a problem of marketability, okay? We have strongly positive indirect attraction. This is the center of a major economic hub in the world. And there's all this great infrastructure there to get you services. You can get excellent fiber optic. All this traffic can come in. So you have all these indirect attractors that are really, really high. And therefore, the sellers believe they have very valuable property. But then you have strongly negative direct attraction. The surrounding environment, I didn't take enough pictures of this probably to show you this, but it's all vacant, blighted blocks with a lot of razor wire and stuff, okay? Not nice. And so you couldn't collect enough rent. If you were to take over one of those razor wire blocks and turn it into an apartment building, you'd have a really hard time collecting the kind of rent that you would need to pay for the land prices that the sellers think it's worth. And so you get stagnation. Now, Houston built Discovery Green. They spent $182 million building outstanding interface. And this is a little bit of what it looks like. These pictures are taken right after it opened in 2009. And you can see this is a really cool place. This is a really compelling place. And this crowd, this is a daytime crowd. It's like this all the time. Okay, people have seemingly materialized out of thin air and shown up at this park because it's that attractive. And what happened that's really interesting is during the height of the recession, we had 4 major groundbreaking projects open directly around the park. Now, I say major projects in terms of the construction value of these projects was very, very high. And so what we see is that by adding great interface to the equation, they created enough direct attraction that they were actually able to rebalance the scales and make development marketable in this area. But as a thought of caution here, the park is not enough by itself. And to show you what I mean, let me show you one block that's just one block removed from the park. If you were to, sorry, I'm skipping ahead here. If you were to go stand on this block, there. If you were to stand on that block right there, and you were to look to the east, this is what you would see. And if you were to look to the south, this is what you would see. If you were to look to the west, this is what you would see. Well, what do you want to guess is on the north? Well, it's not a parking garage, but I don't know what the hell it is. And the sad thing is that the city is kind of doing their part, right? They built this awesome people conduit, okay? But there's no interface here. There's no connection. You're not combining the private realm and the public realm in a way that's compelling, and there's no linkage, there's no connection there. So this is essentially a big fat waste of money. So Houston is letting mediocre development wall off its big attractor that they spend all this money on, and that's going to stop the spread of revitalization outward. And it's really sad when you stand there and look at it. This is the north side of the park. This is really interesting space that you really want to inhabit. And when you look across the street, this is the new Discovery Tower. And okay, it's not so bad, this side of it, but this thing has a building on one block and a parking garage on the next block. So that's 8 block faces. What did they do with the other 7? Okay, here's the view down the side. How much do you want to walk down that street, right? How badly do you want to go past block after block of this? This is all the utility ducts, by the way. It smells here, okay? And they put this directly outside of their park. It gets even more sad. This is the south side of the park. This is the brand new Embassy Suites Hotel built across the street after the park was done. Which brings me to an obvious question. Why would they do that? The answer is commoditization. The commoditization is the process where you take things that were once unique and you dumb them down, you strip them down, you try to standardize them and genericize them. And this is how things like Tylenol were once a unique product and become generic, become commodity that are just everywhere. The American economic machine is trying to do this to real estate because they want to be able to securitize it and finance it the way Wall Street finances stocks and bonds and things like that. But the problem is that you can't extract the uniqueness of location out of real estate, so you can't actually commoditize it. But we're trying as best we can. That's why we build places like this. We try and strip all the uniqueness out of them. But it's interesting because when the bank wants commoditization and the market wants differentiation, you get weird crap like this. Or this. So in conclusion, we need to be creating economically sustainable places. To give a really fast comparison, because Will's waving at me. Thanks, Will. The Discovery Green, the city spent $187 million, have no interface requirements, and to skip ahead, they're getting basically a 6.7% tax return on their investment in property taxes based on the development this has triggered. In Portland, they built a streetcar and coupled it with great interface standards, and they're getting a 68% rate of return on their investment. That's 10 times more bang for your buck. So if we look at these two, it's pretty obvious which one we'd rather have in our city, right? You'd rather have 10 times more return for your money. So that's kind of my point. Our key takeaways here is that, and this should be inherently obvious because this is basically the point of new urbanism, but we need to be creating a resilient urban fabric with quality interface. When we do that, it creates and sustains economic growth. Also, obviously, when we disrupt the urban fabric, we degrade that. And this is what Chuck's been trying to talk about, that when we ruin our built environment, we create a Ponzi scheme where wealth is destroyed. And we can't afford to do that anymore. And so finally, it's the economy, stupid, right? We need to be talking about the economic performance of urbanism because this is our movement's winning argument. This is where we beat everyone else hands down. This is where we have a home run out of the park and are better by far than any other possible solution that's out there and available. And not enough of us are familiar with it and not enough of us are talking about it. So I hope today I've been able to introduce some terms and some ideas that sort of help you sort of wrap your mind around it all at once and think about it. And my hope is that when you walk outside, you'll start to see things a little bit differently. That suddenly you'll see cores and interfaces and conduits and you'll be able to notice these patterns yourselves. And I very much hope that you'll email me when you see an interesting pattern so that I can start collecting more of these case studies and continue to make this a more interesting and robust sort of set of information. So thank you all very much for your time. Again, please feel free to fill these out and contact me, and I would love to follow up with each of you about whatever it is that's on your mind. So thank you very much.
While Russ is changing out, I wanted to bring attention to some of the folks here of some activities that are occurring here at the CNU that I would encourage all of you to attend, especially those of you that are at the Congress for the first time. Every morning there is a breakfast provided by CNU. It's early, so if you go to the pub crawl tonight, that may be difficult, but there's a first-time orientation session tomorrow morning. I believe it's around 8 o'clock or 8:30. I'd welcome you to show up there and introduce yourself to other folks that are here and learn a little bit about the Congress. There's also chapter meetups that are occurring. These are highly social events at some of the greatest restaurants and pubs here up along Clematis Street. So anybody that's in the Florida chapter, if you want more details, we've got one of the coolest spots, I think. It's going to be on the rooftop of Roxy's Pub. We're doing a joint with the New York chapter. But find out where your chapters are at, go to those, and do like I do, hit every single other chapter meetup that you can, see what other chapters are doing, and get out there and take advantage of some of the social places. And if you're not a member, there's a booth over in the exhibit hall where you can get signed up. We've got some new member structure, so take advantage of that.
Thanks, Ed, for killing time. But hope to see everyone at the chapter meetups. My name is Russell Preston. Will invited me to talk today, and he didn't really give me a specific topic, but there was some thought to it because I think I'm going to talk about how you actually build interfaces and good cores. So I'm glad Andrew went before me. How many people are architects in the room? All right, how many are planners? How many are developers? Okay. How many are lawyers? Other. Okay. So that's part of why I love CNU is it's pretty interdisciplinary. And what I'm talking about today is an experiment I've been working on for about 8-9 months now. And it's worth just taking a minute to thank a few people who are in the room who kind of, well, one, either made this possible, or two, I'm going to blame them for why I left a perfectly well-paying job to try and start a company. Yeah, everyone see this, okay. But yeah, in New Orleans, we got together with a group 2010, and then again in January or February in South Beach this year. And a lot of these people are here. I think most of them will probably be at the Congress. So please grab them and interact with them. And I just wanted to thank all of them personally for being there the last couple of years while I've been trying to figure this out. So what have I been trying to figure out? There's a business model that makes the thing on the left. That is applicable to today's financial metrics and all. Now, on the right, is there a business model that can produce that is the question. And it sort of came to me that, perhaps rather than design standards or codes or anything like that, an opportunity where I could contribute to CNU more powerfully is to actually go out there and try and figure out if there's a business that we can create this in places that we're not doing it already. And Andres and I will get in a fight later on this week about if the city or the suburbs is the battlefront. And I'm going to make the case that the city is. Okay, how did I arrive at that conclusion? And I kind of took my head out of the sand and looked around for a couple years at some other what I'd call new paradigm companies, the ones on the top, and then sort of compare them to, okay, well, what are the sort of what are the giants that equate to them, and say, okay, well, how are their differences, and how are they both successful? And I thought, okay, well, how can we apply that to real estate or to what I'm calling the active urbanating or the urbanists business? And does someone have this book in the room? No? Okay. I thought they would. But so this went around 6 months or 8 months ago, which is sort of this, how do you actually deconstruct a business? And what's on the left is sort of chicken scratch that came together when I was thinking through how to do this. And what does it really mean? It's like, how do you take places like this in cities, this is in Boston, but it could be anywhere, and figure out how to add value to it, how to put a new core in and build a better interface. So this building came online a little over a year ago, and it's fully occupied, but the surrounding environment is still pretty poor. So, you can see the check cashing pawn shop here. The crazy thing is this is literally across the street from a subway stop. So, there are opportunities in the cities that I think we as urbanists have to take advantage of. So before I go into any of the details, I always like to sort of step back and say, well, what are what's emerging? What are the trends that we need to pay attention to? And I spent close to a decade working on new urbanist planning projects. This is Mashpee Commons, and sort of watched all of the problems and all the successes that come out of those projects happen. But then, once 2008 happened, it started to occur to me that the cities, the same principles we're using in the suburbs apply to cities too, and we just need to figure out a way to better apply them. So when 2008 happened, we stopped building in Providence, and we started focusing on still moving the ball forward. And how do you do that when you can't build anything, and it's very hard to get new retail tenants, and you're trying to just keep your business going. So rather than just sit around and twiddle our thumbs and do deferred maintenance projects, we decided that we'd kind of bring together a coalition around improving some public spaces or some interface in the city. And this is a job that cities don't know how to do. I mean, you talk to Ethan Kent, you talk to Mike or Tony, cities are dying to understand how they can develop their public space into meaningful destinations and that attract people to them. So I think we have a huge tool that we're not leveraging, and that's the power to develop or create economic development out of nothing, out of empty space that people have overlooked. So this is, this last fall or a couple months ago got an NEA R-Town grant, and this is moving forward into first phase engineering. So hopefully it'll be New England's largest public market in the center of Providence, which is now a 22-berth bus depot. So how did I draw this line in the sand? And I'm going to blame Ian Rasmussen, who's here, for a lot of this talk. It's basically, it occurred to me that we have to show people that the cities can be better, and we, I think, have the tools to do that as new urbanists. So I've kind of drawn that line in the sand, and it wasn't on accident. A whole conversation in 2008, 2009 leading up to this was, how do we think about what we're doing now in this new economy? And part of it was this whole idea, well, we're back in 1880, and this is Back Bay in Boston, which was started in 1857, landfill. The whole idea behind this project was to make land. They had people moving to Boston and they wanted to make land. But so what's gone from the equation that they didn't have? We no longer have really great, robust public financing. We don't have any elephant gun economic development plans with giant, we can't get Amazon as a tenant, although I'll show a project that did that. And then tax increment financing. Those are tools that we used up until the crash to get big projects done, but those are all gone. So if we look back at how they made land before, and these are great places. This is the South End, which is also a landfill. This is Ian's favorite street in my neighborhood. These are gorgeous places with incredible interface. And this is what I think what we can bring to the table is how to make this stuff again. So as we talk about guidelines and design standards. So from a business perspective, how should we be thinking as well? So, and the first one is share. I think what's so great about Next Gen is this openness and inherency that everyone has to just share and talk about failures and successes. And I think that's sort of an operating principle I'm taking forward with me in a big way. And I think that's not unique, and history shows us differently. So then these efforts have to be self-propelled. And what I mean by that is, this is a company called Fuse Project. They're behind the Jawbone, they've done projects with Herman Miller. But they're a unique design firm where they actually partner with their clients to produce the product and defer their fee-based profits till later on. And it's been very successful. So this is a unique and different business model that they're applying to design. So I've seen a number of companies tinkering with this idea as equity partners. And then also looking at the idea that these, bootstrapping. We don't have an office and we have no expenses, or essentially none of expenses. This comes out of the, if you look at a company like 37 Signals. Anyone use Basecamp, a software platform? A few people. Okay. Well, if you look at the tech sector and the sort of lean startup movement, it's all about how do you get something out there quickly, prototype it, and iterate. And I think as new urbanists, we can't sit on our hands for 5 years and then release the perfectly, monograph of a book and expect it to, make significant change. I mean, Mike with Tactical Urbanism, he can talk about this later today. It's been that model specifically. So then, we can't waste anything either. So this idea that there's no waste, and this, kind of came out of this idea. This is essentially the business model for the Tesla car line. So how can we as urbanists learn things from what people are doing in the car industry? And I think this actually is emblematic of this state we're in America, where we need to be thinking about the romance of driving the countryside and the economy of living in the city, and how can we not waste any of that. So it gets to, if you're going to be doing something now, I think it has to be uncompromised. If you look at what Apple did with the iPod, there were other MP3 players out there before, but none of them are around anymore because the iPod was uncompromised. So I think a lot of the projects that we could critique in the new urbanism are compromised. And why? And market forces, idiot clients, bad zoning, whatever it is. So how can we need to manipulate that process so it's to the benefit of everyone and have an uncompromised product. So, and this is a big one for me, is sort of a year ago I said to myself, assume you know nothing, and I still do. I talk to people in other industries, and the reality is no one really knows what's going on. You can guess, but I've heard enough people, enough smart people who have done bigger things than I have say, I don't know what's going on. And if you hear anyone say they do know what's going on, don't believe them. So that's what I mean by this is a little bit of an experiment. And IDEO, this is another design company with offices all over the country. They have a process where they essentially have institutionalized this at their company, how they discover something and approach everything from product design to pharmaceuticals with the idea that you should attack a problem as if you know nothing. So if you reverse the thinking and sort of how do you apply design to business, and what does that look like? What are the framework that you need to provide? So a big piece of this for me was coming up with some key partnerships. Where there's a number of different revenue streams that could create a company like this. But the first is finding key partnerships. So those can be local banks, those can be equity partners, those can be landowners, they can be a variety of things. So this was the first sketch I did of a project I'll show you later on at a bar with an equity partner. And it's essentially using design as a way to create value. And this ended up essentially being the brief that we shaped the entire project on. So another way that we have to sort of do this is by, you hear, value capture. Has people heard that term? So value capture is essentially when you take a linear piece of infrastructure that is being underutilized and you build something adjacent to it to take advantage of that infrastructure. And I think this is sort of a play on Leon Creer's famous diagram, but it's a missing piece that I think the interface idea, the Warnoof discussion we had earlier, gets at. It's that there's an integrated investment that has to happen between land use and infrastructure, and how can we actually do that and take advantage of that? So if you do that properly, you get a rail line and you get some civic infrastructure in, then you get private investment like around Discovery Green. If all of that is successfully coordinated, you get a sustainable community. So I think we have to understand the economics behind capturing that value in a much better way. So this applies at this much, much smaller scale as well. And this is the conversation we had in South Beach in February that Will, I think, sort of grabbed him and said, you have to show people this. Is, value creation is what most developers want to try and do. And this is a couple tricks, and this is sort of an idealized version of it. But it essentially happens in a couple places where if using design, well, three things: location, understanding local knowledge explicitly, and then design. So the local knowledge aspect is buying the land cheap. So you're not going to make any money unless you buy the land cheap. So and then knowing the local market enough that you can beat up your appraiser where you actually appraise it higher than you bought it. So therefore you've just made equity. So then the next step is you go out, you design it, you get a construction loan, you get financing, so then you're in the hole. So then what happens after the project's done and you tenant it and you lease it up, ideally for more than your projections said you were going to? Well, then you can actually create more value by having it reappraised, and perhaps ideally it's worth more than what you have in the building. And then when you go and you put it into permanent financing after it's stabilized, you can actually get a check and walk away with more money than what you put into it. So that's, you've made a building and you've made a little money. And this cycle is what a lot of developers are trying to do with rental housing right now, is make a little money on the back end and move it into the next rental project. So this value creation is, I think, important to understand because it's all about design. If the building's ugly, this doesn't work. If it's on a bad site, it doesn't work. So you can actually create more value with better design. And this is what developers want right now. So another key piece of this is you can't create value unless you have an interdisciplinary approach. You can't forget about something. So it's important to have everyone at the table right away, early on. And you've heard sustainability, people talk about this forever. But I'm going to tell you from an economic standpoint, this is essential in today's economy. People are still want the same return for a lot more perceived risk now. So this is a way to hedge against that. And a lot of these images I'm showing are just stuff I scanned out of my sketchbook, and I haven't cited a lot of the images I pulled from the internet, so I apologize to those people. I'll try and point them out if I can. But this is very much a work in progress. So please, if you disagree, speak up afterwards, and yell at me in the halls if you want. But it's really important too that not only are these to be interdisciplinary, but you think about your business as a vertically integrated company. And what does that mean? So this is shop architecture out of New York. Now we can talk about their buildings as not being, contextual. We can lambast them for what they're doing in Brooklyn. But the reality is, if you look behind the curtain and you look at what they're doing from a business standpoint, they're very progressive and very innovative in that regard. They actually have an architecture company, they have a construction company, they have an energy startup company, and I don't know if this still exists after the recession, they had an equity fund that they could bring to the table and become partners on projects. So they had a variety of different chains in the sort of delivery of the built environment that they were participating in. And I think we can't just think of ourselves as an architect or as an engineer. I think we need to think of ourselves as urbanists and figure out ways to participate throughout the entire process of delivering urbanism. So another value that we have to embed into these new paradigm businesses is seeing the future. That's a powerful skill that a lot of us in this room can have, where we can actually show people what the future could be. And that's compelling, this idea that we can demonstrate vision. This is Berlin, and if these blocks in this part of Berlin are fantastic, but someone said, this could be different, and we have the ability to show people that. So I think inherently under all of this is these are place-based ideas. This is not like I'm going out into the greenfield environment, and these are dealing with existing places largely, and they're built on the idea that people should come first. And inherently, and this is what some bankers have told me too, is that projects just need to make sense now. Like if they're too far out of in the gray area, they don't make sense. So I think inherently you have to, at your gut level, they just have to make sense. And this can be, a banker in Atlanta was telling me they invested in the project on one corner of the street, but they wouldn't invest in the guy's project on the other corner of the street. It comes down to that little thing: access, design, lighting. So I think the banking industry is being much more attuned to this, specifically the private banks, which is where I think a lot of the deals are getting done right now. So strategic partners, you can't make squares like this unless you actually have people who believe in the design. And they have to be strategic partners, and you have to have your skin in the game. So I try always to leverage the design skills and the ability to bring the place to fruition as a way to get equity into the deal. Because then I can be a part of the project all the way through, and I can put all the time I need to into it to make sure it's perfect. So that happens because there's a strong demand for places right now. And in places like, now this isn't happening everywhere. This goes back to the line in the sand. There are some bright spots on the map in the U.S. right now where there are very strong markets. Markets like this is, the E-types. You talk to Todd Zimmerman or Lori Vogt around the CNU later this week. They'll tell you that there are places where there are very strong markets for rentals. And this is what people are going after. But these people are early adopters. They understand design. They grew up on the internet. They want to have a nice coffee shop. So, I think inherently we have to, know this market. And that goes for some of the lesser dense projects in the inner ring suburbs. But it comes back to that there are a lot of companies, corporate companies, that are interested in place right now. So how do we align our interests with those corporations or with those third parties that are interested in delivering it? I mean, this is a great piece of architecture, but what's important to me right here is why did they choose to have dinner out there? And why are the people there? So we have to step back a second and think about, programming. What happens there? What are the destinations that people go to? What are the uses that need to be there? How do people enjoy themselves? So most of what I've been doing the last year is on learning design and learning programming, which is how do you provide the unique opportunities that urbanism creates. So, inherently under this is a different paradigm of investment, which is a generational investment. There are people out there that are, like, for example, there are sovereign funds that are organizing financial investments in the United States right now that are looking at generational returns. That money is out there that's floating around. They're looking to say, well, I'm going to look at a dozen cities in the U.S. to place, a couple $1 billion in investment portfolios. Why do they want to come to your city? What are they investing in? They're investing in a sure thing. So we're spending a lot of time iterating design. This is a building we're working on now to make sure that it has the design is going to work with a long-term investment horizon. So that brings me to another opportunity that I think we haven't really seized, and this is perhaps part of the landscape urbanism discussion that was from a few years ago, that public space is a piece of infrastructure to a lot of cities. But so are highways, so are viaducts, so are parks. So as urbanists, we need to sort of step back and what can we offer the municipality, besides just the zoning code, and how can we manipulate the infrastructure of a place to actually create more value for its tax revenue. I mean, Chuck will talk to you about this forever, and he's dead on. There are places that are looking like Providence is looking to figure out how do we leverage more investment in downtown, and the big thing is, well, we need to make the bus station into a park. So infrastructure, how do we do that, is a big question that I'd like to pose to a lot of you today. So I've been testing the hypothesis, and I'm going to speed through these because I'm getting close on time. But so how does it work? So John Ford, I don't know if John's here, he and I worked on a zoning code in Connecticut earlier, a year ago or so. Basically, they were a small town was looking at how do they urbanize and how do we actually deal with stormwater. So we've been tinkering at that kind of scale. Brown University I worked with, and they wanted to leverage their investment in a new medical school in a very shitty part of Providence. And but the long-term potential is fantastic. So they invested in a brand new square, which was designed with Jerry Van Eck out of New York. And this was, essentially we looked at this from a place-based approach. What's going to happen in here? Food trucks, volleyball, all of that. And this is an Instagram shot of the first farmers market there earlier this spring. So in Boston, are there neighborhoods in your city that you know the name of, but you don't know where they are? Has anyone not been to one of those neighborhoods? Go to it. There are neighborhoods in your city that you haven't been to. Go to them. So there's a neighborhood in Boston that I hadn't been to, near Longwood, Medical, sort of small little neighborhood, and we realized that had a great main street, had a commercial core with a subway line, but there was still a lot of underutilized assets that were there. And this is literally 2 blocks from a subway station. But this is where I think we're wrong. The suburbs aren't where it's at. This is still getting built. This is 2 years old. This is literally 3 blocks from a subway station in Boston. So the zoning in Boston is allowing this to happen. But it's also allowing other big things to do. So 2 of my partners renovated this building on the right, and then figured out a way they could use the extra lot to build a new infill building on the left. So we finished that project last summer. 3 condos. It's a Victorian neighborhood, so we tried to hit the Victorian market. And I showed this earlier. But the same thing. This is on the main street. We're trying to figure out how to get the first floor, the thing next door to work now. And then this is getting into a bigger scale of project that we're looking at, which is a mixed-use apartment building. 2 buildings built on a single site. And this is how it looks like now in the back, what it could look like, in the front, And this is all about how do we actually make the interface much, much better so that this part of this neighborhood changes its identity, and we can create the value here based on the proximity to the rail, the proximity to the amenities, which are job centers as well. This is a 4.5, probably 10-minute walk to the largest hospital complex in Boston. So, here's some other images of it. So it can work. We haven't built that thing yet, but we're trying to work that through now. So I'm hopeful, and I'm pretty optimistic it's going to happen. But the idea is that this is about T5 and T6. T4, 5, and 6. How do we actually apply new urbanism in the city? It's a different business model than what's been happening in the suburbs. And I encourage everyone to go, take a look at their own companies and think about, well, what is the business model that delivers its profits? And we're looking at this in a couple other scales, not just the 1-2 buildings in the city context, but looking at it at larger scales. Like, what are the models that we need to develop to do full urban quarters? To actually do a huge collection of buildings. And this is in Long Island, around an existing transit stop, commuter rail. And then the whole idea that why should this is a conversation for later, but why should Asia and India and everyone, why should they be thinking about new cities and America shouldn't be? I mean, why is that off the table for us as an economic development strategy? So is there, we have to look at this along every scale. And there are places where this is happening, where there are really robust partnerships, and that's my wife and Ian when we were touring Dumbo 6 or 8 months ago. Providence is an example of this as well, and then South Lake Union. And there are successes and failures of this, across the board, both at an interface level, a core level, and a conduit level. But there are people in cities tinkering at the scale of the neighborhood. There's and significant. Have people been to Dumbo recently? Next time you're in New York, go. It's hard to get to, but you have to go. Mike's office is there. You can go bug him. But it's an incredible story that's not a new urbanist story, but it's exactly what we should be looking at as models that we can use from. So now I'm not saying that sort of the fee-based consulting is off the table. I do that as well, but I think there's a long lineage of this, throughout history that we have to figure out a different way of participating where we can add more value as a consultant as well. And I think being an integral team member is an important approach. Apple is using fee-based approach. The iTunes store. There's ways that we can manipulate the businesses we're in to create these places. So I'm not saying that's off the table. And then there's another one that I think that we're tinkering in right now, and hopefully later this year we'll release a few of them. But products, actually producing things that people want, that we see, in our daily travels, that are in the market sectors that we're dealing with. As urbanists, we actually know places very, very well. And if there's problems you see, there are people out there that will help you create something to solve it. So we're venturing into that a little bit. That image has nothing to do with product design, though, so I'm sorry. And then, so I think in closing, kind of, keep your eyes out on these new paradigms, these shifts, these little wiggles that people are making, and think about how you can apply them to urbanism. Ghost towns might happen again. What can we learn from favelas? I think there are a lot of places that we need to kind of tease out the good and the bad. And then, how do these actually affect urbanism? I'm fascinated by how quickly places can urbanize in this country, and I don't think we should forget that. In San Francisco, this occurred very rapidly. So, how can we not lose thought of that frontier mentality that exists in America, and how can we sort of, as a movement, recapture that? And I think it's important in this time period we're in, specifically with looking to the future and sort of rediscovering, the sort of pioneering nature of the American city, that we have an opportunity as new urbanists to help move that conversation in the right direction. Now, I sat at a jury at the GSD a few weeks ago, and these are the projects that are coming out of the planning department there right now. This actually won the ULI's award for urban design. So we have a challenge ahead of us that's not in the suburbs, but it's in the cities. This is Ad Inc.'s Mass Art Dormitory building. This is built now. This is coming online later this summer. These proposals and concepts that are coming out of the academy and coming out of places that we would consider the dark side are getting into the cities. We need to stop that as well. And I think we need to go back to this idea of propaganda, this idea that there was a point in time in America where the frontiersmen, the Western expansion was a good thing, growth was a good thing, building places and cities was a good thing. So I think we need to do that again, because there's, how do we use propaganda? How do we use this national development discussion at the continental scale to move us in the right direction? I think it's really about America as a conversation. It's not the block, the neighborhood, it's the whole continent. How can we rethink that? And they've done this before. GM killed the streetcar. So we need to be cognizant that we should take that bull by the horns and reposition it. And sort of in closing, I think there's a next American urbanism on the horizon. I think it's something that's much more place-based. It can be one story or it can be many stories, but it's going to be around this idea of creating value, and it has to be an economic underpinning. So we were responding to that 20 years ago. And we've been doing this for since then. So I've been asking myself, where are we going next? What does it look like, and how do we get there? So thank you, and that's how you get a hold of me if you disagree with anything or agree. I'd love to hear feedback. So thank you.
That a boy? Oh.
Yours is on here, right? So. Do you know how to set up to...
That's not me.
No.
That's me.
It's not PDF. This is
Is this the laser?
yes.
What are you doing? That's the gold mine. I'm gonna graph it up. You're gonna see the value. It's gonna be x-axis like barrels of Iranian oil produced in the daily, like y-axis. You're gonna see that a boy. It's a great name to it. That a boy.
Can you just share your slides as you go quick? Does that work?
Oh, there's no time. It's much easier.
Okay.
But is that up?
No.
It was there. It should have done. Okay, I can just use the
Yeah.
I'll probably actually go faster. There you go.
Okay,
Just
there we go.
maximize this somehow.
Okay, Ian Ross. Oh, that's you.
Okay. Thanks, Will. How many? I'm sorry? That's all I deserved. Yeah. How many folks in this room know what a Pecha style presentation is? Oh, right on. Okay. Well, this was intended to be that, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's 20 slides in 20 seconds a piece. And the person, me in this case, the facilitator, moderator, doesn't actually typically have control. They just sort of fade them in and fade them out in 20 seconds. But apparently that technology has eluded us today. So I'm going to just be in charge of pressing the button. But the good news is, in that regard, is I've never spent more than 15 seconds on a slide. So this will go faster than the 20-second allotment. Okay, but it does give me a little front end, which is nice. My name's Ian Ross. I'm the guy in the upper left. And I work with a group called the City Design Collective, and we are out of Oakland, California, and you can reach us at 3 W's and then citydesigncollective.com. You can actually reach me while we're here. I'm Ian at citydesigncollective.com, and we work exclusively for the public sector. So we work for cities to help them revitalize districts, mixed-use corridors. We do public realm design, like the design of streets and open spaces, block structures, and we do a lot of community visioning. Okay, I'm going to start the Pecha now. And I'm here, and this actually builds on a lot of what was being said today, which is really great, to remind you that your clients are not developers. Sorry, Russ. They are not city managers. Wrong again. Your clients are not planning departments. Your clients are the people who will live, work, recreate, and otherwise dwell in the spaces that you influence for generations to come. Now, ever since folks started to realize that if you just jam the huts a little closer together, right, and as exemplified in the Roman Forum on the left and the streetcar suburbs in the early 20th century, the best city spaces, the best urbanism responded to human behavior. It had nothing to do with zoning codes. It had nothing to do with building types and regulations. It was based on how do we use this space and how can we reformulate it to serve our preferred means of using spaces. Now, Sproul changed all of that. That is Wally Cleaver. When we started to separate uses on behalf not of humans and not on how we wanted to use the spaces, but of how we wanted to kick the seat back and drive around, we put the housing over here and the retail over there and the office someplace, all together elsewhere. And it had nothing to do with us anymore. And I think the results are in, right? Besides being sort of isolated and alone and auto-dependent, we're also broke and flooded. So I don't know about you, but there's really nothing worse than being lonely, broke, and flooded. Now, moving on. For the past 20 years, many of the folks in this room and many of the folks in this building, if they've arrived by now, have been working day in and day out to sort of put all these pieces back together, right? Smart growth, smart code, form-based codes, to build compact, walkable, mixed-use development. We use all these terms, but really what it was about was trying to create places for people, right? But there's something very peculiar about how we've been going about it. And that is, well, this doesn't do anything, and that is that the tools that we've been utilizing, right, whether you do form-based codes like we do in my office, where you focus on form. So we start with the district type, it's the transect, and we move to building types, open space typologies, you know, frontage conditions, all the things that you see that are focused on form, shop fronts. Or maybe we focus on some land use. You ever look at a land use list? It's this exhaustive list of nouns, right? Things that we anticipate going places. Well, they're going to sell sofas there and pianos over there, and they can sell shoelaces right over there. We can permit that. So we focus on land uses and form. And it's peculiar because these are the very same organizing principles that the folks who zoned for sprawl use themselves. It's just an inverse of the priorities. People who were doing not smart, I suppose, or conventional zoning codes were prioritizing use. Here's your land use list, right? There's a little bit of management as to how you go about the approval process, and then there was a little something to say about form, maybe a setback line. Now, you know what we all do? Everybody in this building, basically. We prioritize form, and we say, these are the spaces, right, that make sense for walkability, right? A little bit of management, and then we create a little more flexibility for land use so developers can have a little less entitlement risk and a little more flexibility. But at the end of the day, it's the same tools. It's the same tools. So I ask the following: are these the right tools that address how people actually live in the cities? Are these all the tools that we need to help us plan for how people actually want to live in the cities? Or are these just the tools that we came up with because we're architects, landscape architects, and planners? Listen, I'm one of them too. There's nothing wrong with being an architect, landscape architect, or a city planner, but I'm just simply asking a question. That's what NextGen is all about, right? It's about the future. Are these really all the tools that we need? And I offer the following. If you look at the SMART code, and we don't use the SMART code at City Design Collective, but it's an admirable code. If you look at the SMART code, and you look specifically at the way that they code for that little bit of space that goes between the curb and where the cars are moving, which is called the travel lane, right? If you look at that little space, that's referred to as the parking lane. Just think about that for a second. It's the parking lane. I guess that presupposes that it's going to be occupied by a car, or it's going to be a bunch of asphalt just sort of lying down waiting for a car, right? But in fact, if you look at some of the best places in the world, and I'll just plug San Francisco on the left as one of them, here's a parklet. Right? Here's people sitting outside and eating in that very same parking lane, right? On the upper right, that's an art installation in the parking lane. And right here, these are bicycles in Paris in the parking lane. So I would presuppose that if we just simply thought about how to code for people, that we might consider not calling it a parking lane. Maybe we should call it a flexible lane. In a flexible lane, you could do a range of things. You could allow for automobile parking, fine. What about outdoor dining, gardens, stormwater infiltration, food carts? In fact, this is Madison last year. I don't know how many of you folks stuck around and hung around by the food carts out at the proper square green. This is a project that my office is doing in the city of San Pablo in California, and we were coding for a green too. So what we did is on the streetscape design, we called for wiring all the tree grates with auxiliary power so the food carts could organize along the perimeter of the green. We were coding for how the people might want to use that space. Now, let's address land uses. Land uses, again, nouns. Let's look at some of them. Here's cabinets, candy, carpets, cleaning, cold storage, dairy products. 10 years ago, nobody at the planning desk could have come up with internet cafe. And if they had, they would have had to amend, you know, like sort of open up the big zoning code, blow the dust off of it, and stick a Band-Aid on it and call Internet Cafe and alphabetize it so that you knew you could do it. I recommend that we not think of land use as a noun, but as a verb. Use. How is it going to be used? This is a Ford dealership, former Ford dealership in Alameda, California. It's now a food co-op. This is a vacant, commercially zoned property in Benicia, California. It's currently used as a community garden. Now, in the city of Alameda, my office decided to throw away the land use list for a district that we were attempting to revitalize. And in place, we wrote intent statements. And we worked out the intent statements with the community in a charrette process. Here's the intent for Main Street retail. Main Street uses offer goods and services that attract and sustain pedestrian activity in support of a vibrant, walkable, diverse environment for shopping, strolling, dining, and entertainment. Note, uses that detract from the pedestrian-oriented character and synergy of the district are prohibited. What else do you need to know? This is a project that we're looking at in Colusa, California, which is up the Route 5 corridor. This is a town unlike any town I've ever worked in. If you look at the transect, right, with urban on the right and sort of rural on the left, this thing fits in somewhere between T2, T3. Folks basically drive around in dualies. If you don't know what a dually is, see me afterwards. But what happens is they go out to the river and they catch a bunch of fish, stripers, you know, like big fish. And then they come in and they put the fish on the truck. And then they want to go home and deal with the fish and the gasoline and the bait and all the other stuff they deal with. Now, if you went in and built little townhouses, because there is a market pent up for townhouses, right, throughout the state of California, transit-oriented townhouses, those sorts of things, there's no place to put the truck. So we are working on an opportunity site adjacent to the river. This is the put-in through the slough, right? And instead of building an extension of the existing street network, which everybody thinks is a good idea when you do form-based coding, get that street network in, and here's what the street assembly would look like, right, with a sidewalk and a curb and a parking lane and go lanes. What we are doing is simply creating, like what Eliza was referring to earlier, as Woonerf. We're putting in streets that are cobbled, have no curbs, and have no sidewalks. That way you can drive in your dually, you can have your boat attached to the back, you can unload adjacent to your block, you can load in your single-family detached or small lot home, you can reload what you need on your boat, and then you can bring your boat back and drop it down by the water. In other words, we're not just using a template, but we're coding for the people. Another thing we're looking at is how to orient buildings toward the river. And the way we're handling parking, this is actually a parking lot idea that we're coming up with, which is, why are we putting stripes every 9 feet in a parking lot so we can count the spaces where maybe on like Saturday before Christmas, maybe perhaps they're all occupied and we can, you know, sort of adequately say, oh yeah, look, we got 38 parking spaces over here. Our answer to that was sort of, why? Who cares? What we're doing is actually laying out a parking lot and locating trees about 34 feet on center so people can pull in with their trucks, unload their boats, they can tailgate, they can be outside, they can set up picnic tables. I mean, let's face it, how often are parking lots really fully stocked with cars? By the way, permeable paving at the base. So, coding for the people. These are not new ideas, of course. Everybody's saying that, which I love so much about this morning. I'm like the third person to say, this is nothing new. It's not, right? I refer you to William Holly White in New York City, and Jane Jacobs, also in New York City, and the inimitable Jan Gehl, who's still working today, who made their careers focusing on how human beings, remember them, interact with the cities that we are providing for them, right? And in doing so, help to shape we're responsible to them. That's who you're working for. So we are responsible to figure out how to shape our places so that, like the folks in Russ's presentation, can sit outside and eat, right? It wasn't restricted, and the place was beautiful. So it just encouraged that type of use. Now, nobody has said this any more clearly, perhaps, than MCA, who was obviously referring to the overly stringent regulation when he said, I can't stand it. I know you planned it. I'm going to set it straight this Watergate. I can't stand rockin' when I'm in here because your crystal ball ain't so crystal clear. Ladies and gentlemen of the next generation, I remind you that, not unlike the past cities, that the future of great urbanism will in fact be comprised of forms, building blocks, open spaces, and it will be programmed with anticipated land uses, but it will be occupied by the people. Thank you. You got it? Yeah. All right, you got it. Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Ian. We have one last presentation for this morning. If you've been following closely to your program, you know that we skipped over the presentation on Lithonia. You're ready? We will be coming back to that. We had a scheduling issue with that one, and we'll be coming back to that this afternoon, probably right after lunch. So I recommend that one. That's a good way to get you back in the room for the afternoon. Cool. This is for the clicker if you want. Not working? Okay, and I'd like to introduce Andrew Frey for you.
Oh, wow, this works. My first time using the new PowerPoint for Mac. My name is Andrew Frey, and I'll be as quick as possible. I write a blog called Townhouse Center, which some of you thankfully read. Not as many as I would hoped, but the hits are going up. I want to thank Dan Bartman and Will Dowdy for inviting me, and anyone who does read it for making me matter. I'm also, in my day job, I'm a developer. I'm a development manager for a company that builds decidedly non-new urbanist rental apartment communities. So I'm trying to straddle the line between promoting good urbanism and at the same time learning something about, you know, what Russell was talking about, what are the business models, what are the industry conventions and the norms that we have to work with. And I'm still young in my career, so hopefully I'll deliver something good. this is, we're supposed to be passionate and vulnerable in this talk. So this is what I wanted to write on my grave. And that sort of informs everything that I'm trying to do at Townhouse Center. Townhouse Center this is our mission statement, you got to have it. Trying to promote small, attached, prototypical, adaptable buildings. It's, as far as I know, the first organization dedicated to sharing information about these kinds of buildings and their financial benefits, design, convenience, compatibility, sustainability, economic development, culture, all these things. Currently, it's mostly a website, but I'll get into later how we're trying to take it from the web to reality. This is what the website looks like. It's got basically headlines about different small-scale infill projects, development news from around the world, including a lot of articles about shop houses in Asia, which are surprising, or actually not surprisingly, they're popular. We get a lot of clicks on those. And the blog started in July of 2010, so it's been up for 2 years. We have a Twitter feed and Facebook page, 30,000 hits, 2,400 hits a month in the last 6 months. I actually get a lot of my content from Google alerts. And I'd love to tell a joke about some really interesting tidbit that's come across Google, but most of the headlines about townhouses have a caption or a picture like this. There's a lot of crime and fires in townhouses. So, I don't know. I read Death and Life of Great American Cities, and I just had to include this slide because later to take it full circle, you'll see. When I was a freshman in college, and that, I guess, has fundamentally led me to where I am. I became a land use attorney, and I dealt a lot with community public hearings, representing developers, trying to get approvals. And people are always complaining about big buildings, tall buildings that generate a lot of traffic, that overwhelm smaller buildings. And I started trying to think about, okay, if I were a developer, and here I'm representing developers, so if I were a developer, I wonder if there's a building type that nobody would be opposed to, that's just contextual and compatible, and I wonder if that exists. And then I realized that it did exist, and we've been building it for thousands of years, just not recently. So I started thinking a lot like Russell. What are the conditions that allowed for those buildings to get built? Finance, planning, not zoning, but construction norms and just cultural values that made small-scale infill possible. Around the same time, I got this book from my mom. This is a reprint of basically pattern book. I think a lot of form-based codes have sort of the idea that eventually there might be a pattern book, which is prototype houses or buildings that work in T1, T2, T3, or T3, 4, 5, 6. This was a pattern book for single-family homes from 100 years ago, and I was fascinated by the concept. Definitely a not new urbanist source, but trying to think about, what would that look like? What would a pattern book look like for small-scale infill? And then 2008 happened. A lot of my developer clients were no longer in business, and it got me thinking again. Okay, the product that we're delivering, in public hearings, people are opposed to it. When we build it, it leads to a financial crash. Large single-use buildings. So it sort of reinforced this seed that had been planted. Okay, what about smaller scale infill? And then, obviously it was published. The addendum was published afterward. But if you go back and read the new last chapter of Black Swan by Taleb, this is one of his conclusions. Mother Nature does not like anything too big. Mother Nature does not limit the interactions between entities, it just limits the size of its units. So, you know, the financial crash sort of prompted me to think maybe there's something to do with small-scale infill there. That's a picture of a black swan. What could we build as an industry that is not pro-cyclical, that can smooth out bumps so we can all have more stable careers? So I'm thinking about this, and you know all the examples, South End, Back Bay, West Village, Upper West Side, just all the places that I'd been that had great small-scale infill, places that seemed, you know, to be made up of these buildings that wouldn't lead to crashes. They were these small increments that, like Talib talked about, that that interacted with each other, but if one of them failed, you know, wasn't a catastrophic drop in property value or massive amount of absorption or lack of absorption. So I was looking at these neighborhoods and I said, okay, what are they made up of? They're all made up of the same type of building. Townhouse, row house, shop house, small attached prototypical adaptable buildings. So, you know, I don't have all the answers, but this was suggesting an answer to me. And then I started thinking about, okay, these are buildings, but let's take it back to, you know, the grave, you know, what they write on the gravestone. You know, how have I helped people during my life? Let's think about not just trying to get a product approved that no one, you know, the neighbors aren't going to oppose, or a product that's, you know, not going to cause some financial crisis, but let's think about people. What are the neighborhoods that make people happy? And I just need an excuse to put this up. Where are people delighted? And it kept coming back to those same neighborhoods. So these are neighborhoods, when you think about the intersection between the built environment and their effect on people, they're beautiful, dense, pedestrian-centered, mixed-use, resilient places where people engage with each other, share ideas, and create economic opportunity and culture. So everything that I was sort of seeing, and I'm trying to tell like the story of Townhouse Center, was pointing me to this idea of small-scale infill as the best. You know, if we're going to make a normative judgment about scale, this would be the best scale. So then I went to CNU 18, and I had been to 14 previously, and I love all the sessions that are happening this CNU about incremental development. I think it's great, and I think in the last 2 years, people have definitely caught on. I'm definitely not ahead of any curve on this. I just happened to write a blog about it, but at CNU 18, there was nothing about small-scale infill development. There was, I don't think, a single session or a single panel. And in my mind, you know, when something is better for people, you should allocate time and energy and resources to doing it. You know, the CEOs for cities put out a paper about these organizations, like every county or every region has one, where it's a group that tries to attract corporate headquarter relocations. They try to get, you know, GM or Pfizer or Eli Lilly to come to the region and create jobs. Well, CEOs for cities put out this paper that said only 1% of annual job growth can be ascribed to corporate headquarters relocation. So why do we allocate so many resources? I mean, marketing budget, staff time, column inches in the newspaper, public hearing time to attracting corporate headquarters. 99% of annual job growth comes to growing our local small businesses. Same thing happens with, you know, I took that approach with buildings, right? If, you know, 95% of great urban neighborhoods are made up of small, prototypical, adaptable urban building, why aren't we dedicating 99% of our conference time and our, you know, to talking about these buildings? And instead of that, we were actually devoting almost zero time. So I thought, okay, here's a gap. You know, here's a, you know, instead we were talking about Seaside, which is great, But if I own a 50 by 100 foot lot in downtown Miami, how does this? What am I supposed to draw from talking about form-based codes, complete streets, alternative, all great things, but there's this gap in the discussion about actual buildings and scale. So here was what I came up with. We built to the sky and to the horizon, single-use towers, mostly, and large buildings, mostly to spread costs. And we have regulatory costs that have exacerbated that. The more regulatory costs, the more permits you have to get, the bigger the building you want to build so you can spread the costs. And I definitely face that on a daily basis with building my communities, which are typically 200 units and above. And you deal with situations where you have a paradigm of development that leaves, people assemble large lots of land and then they just leave it vacant, and they miss this market peak. So then 10 years, but their basis is so high that they can't build something. At least we run into this in Miami. Miami is a city of optimists, and that's a double-edged sword because it's great for energy and excitement, but it's really terrible for urban redevelopment. A friend of mine said that he'd rather do urban redevelopment in Detroit because at least there they get to hit the reset button. In Miami, everyone expects, even in the worst of times, to get paid for a 40-story tower. So you have these huge assemblies of land in downtown Miami that sit vacant for 10 years, and then that land seller, tries to absolutely max out what they can get paid for it. 25% of those deals happen, and then we got to wait another 10 years, and meanwhile, we got a hollowed out downtown. So everything was pointing to townhouses, small-scale infill being really, really good, but there being a gap in the discourse about it. So I said, all right, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to start researching and blogging, and it'll be a good motivator or keep me engaged, and I'll have to post, so I'll have to research. And that was a few months after CNU 18. So I started researching, got really interesting people, found them online, just writing articles about small-scale infill. Some new urbanists, some non-new urbanists. Really great blogs, New World Economics. Old Urbanists is a phenomenal blog. Connected with people who are doing these similar things or thinking about issues related to small-scale infill. And so I learned about experts. I learned about benefits. I was thinking about them. I found out about open building and adaptability, this whole conference that they have every year about flexible, adaptable floor plans and buildings. Someone named Natalie Weinberger wrote a great dissertation on shop houses as economic development tools. Small-scale incremental development that can be owned by neighborhood residents as opposed to an out-of-town corporation gives people a sense of ownership. They can participate in the wealth creation as the neighborhood gentrifies rather than getting displaced. So I thought that was fascinating. There's a guy, Jeffrey West, who writes about how the value of cities is in a friction between people. Actually, the discomfort that's created in cities, and that leads to sharing ideas, and then the goal of planning is to manage the discomfort. And there's a guy, Daniel Aldrich, who writes about how small-scale infill promotes disaster recovery, because the first responders to a disaster are not the first responders, they're your neighbors. But you're more likely to know them if you share a backyard wall, fence with them. So I was starting to hear about these different ways of looking at townhouses, thinking of benefits that I hadn't even thought of before. And it also allowed me to have connections with people. I get to speak here today, which I'm really thankful for. Found out that the Urban Land Institute has an ongoing small developer executive education series, which I went to, one of those in DC. The Florida Housing Coalition had a rental housing workshop. This is fun. Alex Gorlin, who some of you guys know, flew KLM, and apparently they give you vodka in porcelain townhouses in first class. So he sent me a couple of these. So I'm putting myself out there, letting people know what I'm interested in, what I'm about, and people are responding. And that's been one of the most rewarding things about blogging. So then so you meet people, and then you get into debates, right? So like I said, I don't have all the answers. I'm enjoying this blogging process and learning and promoting what I think is the right answer. But, for example, Russell and I had an email exchange. We're talking about, just leading up to this conference, should more new urbanists be developers? And I think the answer is yes, but I said I think more people should be developers, because if you want to recreate or create new versions of these great old neighborhoods, you're going to need an army of people to build them. A lot of velocity, a lot of small buildings. Then there's the idea of should a developer be a town builder? Should the developer be a celebrated person in the community? And as a developer, hey, I'd like people to appreciate me, but the bottom line is great urban neighborhoods shouldn't require a hero. They should be the result of, talking about that ecosystem. What are all the factors that that bring to bear on the development decision and the design decision? Wouldn't it be great if that ecosystem actually made it a rational choice to build a great small building, and that 1,000 selfish decisions resulted in a great urban neighborhood? So it's kind of that. The trick is creating that framework. So we have, what I've learned, the people that I've been fortunate enough to meet during this process, the debates we've had, and then now it's turning that into action. So if small-scale incremental development is better, what can we do about it? What I try to do, and what I hopefully do more with actually getting funding for activities, is to share information about the benefits, to identify the obstacles, and to make sure that everyone wins. And the reason why I started with the Jane Jacobs slide is so I could have this slide later, and that is that you can only achieve great things when everyone wins. And nobody knew that better than this guy. When he built a bridge, the unions won, the bondholders won, the politicians won, because they had to, they had a new thing to show off to their constituents, or a new park, and I think that in order to promote better urban neighborhoods, I'm trying to find out ways that everyone can win. So, coming at it from actions that promote better urban development has to address, why should a lender make that loan? Why would an equity partner invest in that? Why would a neighborhood not oppose that? Why would the city prefer this scale of development to another scale of development? And some of the activities that we're considering at Townhouse Center and speaking with some funding partners about, documenting great urban infill where people might not even acknowledge that it exists. The National Trust for Historic Preservation is doing a study of small-scale infill, partnering with them. Joe Minicozy does this great property tax studies, which I'm sure some of you know about, where he finds the property taxes per acre of small adaptable buildings actually far surpass even some significantly larger buildings. We've organized studio courses to teach young architects about small-scale infill, and a whole host of other things. So it's been fun. I've learned a lot. What I wish, we're never going to overcome the cost issue. It's always going to be more expensive to build in small increments by definition. Carol Collette, I mentioned CEOs for Cities earlier. I had an email discussion with her about the small-scale infill idea, and she said that it doesn't make sense to build small buildings in urban areas or in central urban areas. And I wrote back something like, well, what about Boston and West Village and Copenhagen, and no response. So I think I don't know that she thinks, but I'm pretty sure she thinks I'm an idiot. And I haven't built anything in Miami yet. So these are things that I like to do, and I hope you enjoyed hearing this story. This is just one way of promoting better urban neighborhoods, and I hope that it eventually becomes effective. And I'm not in the sort of new urbanist circles. I don't get invited to events in Miami, even though I am a ULI member. But there's ways that we can all promote these better urban principles, and hopefully this has been helpful. So if you want to get in touch, that's my contact info. Thank you.